Chapter 291. Mo Ling, Su Zimo, frowning, the emperor fell into deep thought. How was that possible? Even though the truth was out, the emperor was still unwilling to believe it. How could two completely different images in his heart turn into the same person in the end? After pondering for a moment, the emperor called out in a deep voice, "Men." Before long, two guards appeared and knelt on one knee with respectful expressions, awaiting the emperor's orders. "Go and get the deputy commander of the imperial army, Dai Su." The emperor did not know much about the situation of the Su family and intended to ask Dai Su again. When they heard the emperor's words, the two guards froze and exchanged glances with troubled expressions. However, they did not leave immediately. "What's wrong?" the emperor glared. The two guards shuddered and one of them said hurriedly, "Your Majesty, Deputy Commander Dai died more than 10 days ago and his corpse was found in a forest dozens of kilometers away from the capital." "Dead?" The emperor's eyes narrowed with a cold glint. The other guard said, "Deputy Commander Dai's throat was shattered. By the looks of it, it was crushed by the claws of a demon beast. Initial judgment is that he was attacked by a spirit beast." The emperor asked expressionlessly, "Is his storage bag still around?" "It's gone." The emperor sneered, "The fact that his storage bag is gone means that he must have been killed by someone." Although spirit demons possessed intelligence, they could not open the storage bags of cultivators and it was meaningless for them to take away the storage bags. The death of an imperial army deputy commander was not a big deal in the palace and typically, the emperor would not hear of it. Even if he did, he could not be bothered about the death of a Foundation establishment cultivator. But now that he received this news, the emperor vaguely felt that something was amiss. It was too much of a coincidence. After pondering for a moment, the emperor said in a deep voice, "Go and summon the imperial army that accompanied the third princess to Pingyang town of Yan country a few years ago. Also, summon the imperial army that was patrolling the palace with Dai Su before he died." "Understood." The two guards retreated. People came and went on the long street. Two of the cultivators walked among the crowd, attracting the attention of many cultivators. Their gazes contained traces of respect and fear. "Do you see that? Their robes, the emblem on their sleeves, and the sect medallions on their waists indicate that they are cultivators from one of the 5 great sects, the Southern Mountains sect. The one in front should be perfected Yun Shan of the Southern Mountains sect. The young man behind him should be the #1 Foundation establishment cultivator of the Southern Mountains sect. His name is Shijian. I've heard that Shijian is very powerful and has already unlocked 5 spirit meridians. It's enough for him to fight for a spot on the spirit ranking." Not long after, the two of them were submerged in the crowd. Soon, another female cultivator walked out of the crowd, causing the crowd to whisper. "Look, that looks like Adept Yi Ning of the Azure Frost sect." "Yes, it really is her. Although she's a little older, she still looks as beautiful as ever. Looks like the Azure Frost sect will be led by Daoist Master Yi Ning." Not long after, Daoist Yi Ning gradually disappeared into the distance under everyone's gaze. Not long after, another 3 cultivators walked over. The leader was a person in green robes who was at the Jin Dan realm. With one hand behind his back, his eyes were long and narrow. His gaze was sharp and cold as he walked over slowly. Behind that person, a man and woman walked side by side. Both of them were Foundation establishment cultivators. The man was extraordinarily handsome and his eyes were like stars. With a smile on his face, he was chatting softly with the woman beside him. The woman wore a light green dress and was only in her 20s. Her skin was whiter than snow and she exuded a gentle aura. "Look, the 3 of them are from Iridescent Cloud's palace. If I'm not wrong, the green-robed cultivator in the lead should be perfected being Tsang Lang of Iridescent Cloud's palace. It's said that he's extremely strong and has even cultivated an extremely powerful Jin Dan phenomenon. He's one of the top experts of the Jin Dan realm. The handsome man behind him is Si Yutang. He should be here to fight for a spot on the spirit ranking. It said that he has already unlocked 5 spirit meridians and can be considered as a paragon of iridescent clouds palace's foundation establishment realm. That woman seems to be called Meng Qi or something. She looks pretty good. If she can be brought along by perfected being Tsang Lang and stand side by side with Si Yutang, her strength shouldn't be too bad either. Amidst everyone's discussions, the 3 of them gradually walked away. Look at the cultivators from the Southern Mountains sect, Azure Frost sect, and Iridescent Clouds Palace. They seem to be heading in the same direction. Could something big have happened over there? At this moment, someone reacted and asked. You don't even know about that? Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop is holding an auction at the beginning of the month today. The cultivators of the 3 major sects must be there to customize supreme-grade spirit weapons. When he heard the discussions at the side, the handsome man from Iridescent Clouds Palace, Si Yutang, smiled. Junior sister, look. Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop's auction at the beginning of every month is a rare event in the capital. Yes. Chen Mengqi nodded with a look of shock in her eyes. Along the way, almost all the cultivators were discussing Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop's auction today. Furthermore, they were not the only ones. It was said that even Southern Mountains sect and Azure Frost sect were participating in this auction. The fact that a weapon refinement master could wield such power in the capital, almost to the point of being able to summon the wind and rain, had already convinced Chen Mengqi completely. Even someone as strong as her master, perfected being Tsang Lang, did not have such influence. Chen Mengqi yearned and said, I wonder what this Mr. Mo looks like. It would be great if I had the chance to befriend him. That's difficult. Si Yutang shook his head. It's said that very few people have been able to meet Mr. Mo in the 3 years since Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop opened. Not to mention befriending him, even having the opportunity to meet Mr. Mo is worth bragging about for a while. Chen Mengqi pursed her lips and smiled, feeling a little disappointed. Si Yutang consoled her, however, don't worry, junior sister. Master is here for the supreme grade spirit weapon this time round. If Master succeeds, we might be able to bask in his glory and have a chance to meet Mr. Mo in person. Chen Mengqi nodded. I'll definitely succeed. Right then, perfected being Tsang Lang said indifferently with a firm tone without turning back. He had prepared for more than 3 years for the sake of this supreme-grade spirit weapon auction and was confident that he would be able to obtain the opportunity to customize a supreme-grade spirit weapon. Before long, the 3 of them arrived in the vicinity of Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop. The 3 of them looked over and could not help but be dumbfounded, unable to conceal the shock in their eyes. Even perfected being Tsang Lang's expression changed slightly. There were way too many people at the entrance of Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop. At a glance, there were more than 10,000 cultivators gathered here. It was a dense crowd that was extremely majestic. Sweeping through the crowd, there were more than 1,000 perfected Jin Dan cultivators among them. It was rare to see so many perfected Jin Dan cultivators. But now, all of them were gathered at the entrance of this seemingly ordinary residence, waiting and looking into the residence continuously. Chapter 292. So many people. Ji Yaoshua looked at the dense crowd in front of her in surprise. Even though she had long heard of Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop's reputation, she had not expected that the auction at the beginning of the month would attract so many cultivators. Yaoshua, you might not know this, but it's said that this auction might be the last one. The person who spoke was dressed in spotless white robes. It was the commander of the White Hawk Guards, Bai Yuhan. The 2 of them had an extremely good relationship and addressed each other casually in private. Last one. Ji Yaoshua was confused. Bai Yuhan explained, yes, I heard that Mr. Mo will be leaving the capital after the sect competition. Those perfected beings Jin Dan are probably worried that they won't have another chance like this after Mr. Mo leaves. Pausing for a moment, Bai Yuhan swept her gaze across the crowd not far away. Look over there. Perfected beings Jean Dan of Iridescent Clouds Palace, Southern Mountains Sect and Azure Frost Sect are all here. I reckon that the auction this time round will be especially intense. Ji Yaoshua nodded. She was a little distracted and there was a hint of worry between her brows. Bai Yuhan noticed Ji Yaoshua's odd behavior and whispered, "Why? Is there something on your mind?" Ji Yaoshua lowered her head in silence. "Did you quarrel with the king because of that Su Zimo?" Bai Yuhan asked again. "Yes." Ji Yaoshua replied without hiding anything. A few years ago, Ji Yaoshua had told Bai Yuhan about this matter. Bai Yuhan said, "The reason why the king asked you to retrieve this supreme-grade flying sword is probably because he wants you to get to know Mr. Imo, right?" Ji Yaoshua nodded and hesitated for a moment before asking, "Sister Bai, what do you think?" "Me?" Bai Yuhan smiled. "Even though I've never met that Su Zimo, I've met Mr. Imo. I'm sure that Su Zimo can't compare to Mr. Imo." In the Rain Admiration Pavilion, the green-robed cultivator was neither servile nor overbearing. In the face of the pressure from True Fire's sect and the Scarlet Vulture Guards, he was still calm and composed. The scene of him reversing the situation with a few words left a deep impression on Bai Yuhan. Ji Yaoshua frowned. Bai Yuhan said, "Yaoshua, you might not believe me when I say this, but you'll definitely be able to tell that Mr. Imo is different from the rest when you meet him." Ji Yaoshua said faintly, "We'll see." Perfected being Song Lang placed his hands behind his back and puffed out his chest. His gaze was cold as he led his two disciples, Si Yutang and Chen Mengqi, towards the crowd, exuding a sharp aura. Many people sensed something and subconsciously looked over. Iridescent Clouds Palace was one of the 5 major sections. Furthermore, perfected being Song Lang was a well-known ruthless character. Although it was crowded, many cultivators still had some misgivings and opened up a path. Before long, perfected being Song Lang and the other two had already reached the front of the crowd. In the first row, apart from perfected being Song Lang and the other two, there was also perfected being Yun Shan of Southern Mountains Sect and his legacy disciple, Shi Jian. The last one was perfected being Yi Ning of Azure Frost Sect. "I'm determined to get the supreme grade spirit weapon this time round. Fellow Taoists, please don't fight." Perfected being Song Lang glanced sideways. Although his tone was calm, there was an unquestionable tone. "Fufu." Perfected being Yun Shan laughed. "Song Lang, your words are meaningless. You're determined to get it and so am I." Thereafter, perfected being Yun Shan turned around and asked, "What do you say, fellow Taoist Yi Ning?" "Nothing much. Since it's an auction, everyone should compete fairly. There's nothing much to say." Perfected being Yi Ning had prepared for a long time for the bid for the supreme grade spirit weapon this time round as well. There was naturally no way she would leave just because of a single sentence from perfected being Song Lang. Perfected being Song Lang sneered and did not say anything else. Creak. Right then, a crack appeared on the door of Mo's spirit weapon workshop. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Countless gazes landed on the door of Mo's spirit weapon workshop with excitement and anticipation in their eyes. A woman darted out of the door. Her hair was yellow and curly and messy. However, she was so beautiful that one would instinctively overlook that flaw. "Fellow Taoist Nian Qi, you're finally out." "Fellow Taoist Nian Qi, you've become prettier again," a perfected being of Jean Dan said shamelessly. "Fellow Taoist Nian Qi, it's me. Cough, cough, I'm here again." Any cultivator who had stayed in the capital for a year or so would know that Mr. Imo would not appear for each auction and Nian Qi would always be the one hosting it. Although Nian Qi was dressed as a maidservant and was at Foundation establishment, none of the perfected being of Jean Dan present dared to underestimate her. Nian Qi did not say anything first and pressed down with both hands. Instantly, the initially noisy scene quietened down. There were more than 10,000 cultivators present and more than 1,000 of them were perfected being of Jean Dan. However, a simple gesture from the maidservant caused everyone to quieten down. When she saw that, Shen Mengqi's eyes revealed a look of envy. If a maidservant possessed such capabilities, how extraordinary must her master be? Since there are many unfamiliar fellow Taoists here today, I'll simply repeat the rules of the auction. Bidders can collect a number from me later and prepare 30 sets of materials. The starting price is 500,000 superior grade spirit stones and each increment must not be less than 10,000. The highest bidder wins. With that said, Nian Qi took out a bunch of jade badges with numbers from her storage bag and scattered them in midair. Perfected being Tsang Lang waved his sleeves and snatched the number 1 badge. Perfected being Yun Shan obtained the number 2 badge and perfected being Yi Ning obtained the number 3 badge. The other badges with numbers were taken away by the many perfected being of Jin Dan behind the 3 of them as well. Although there were more than 10,000 people present, most of them were disciples brought here by perfected being Jin Dan. The true bidders were the thousands of perfected being of Jin Dan present. Let the auction officially begin. The moment Nian Qi's voice was finished, someone in the crowd had already raised their paddles to bid. In an alley not far away from the crowd, an exquisite carriage was parked. 2 women sat in the carriage. One of them was voluptuous and curvaceous, exuding a mature and seductive aura. The other woman wore a long pink dress and had a veil covering her face. However, when she blinked her eyes, it was as though there were ripples in them that could move one's soul. Auntie Gu, what's the background of this Mo Ling? He's snatching away the business of Sky Treasure Auction House with a single auction. The girl in pink frowned slightly with a hint of anger and curiosity in her tone. I'm not sure, the mature woman addressed as Auntie Gu shook her head. I heard from father that he's a young man in his early 20s. Father has high praises for him and thinks highly of him, the girl in pink said in a low voice. Why? Even the Missy of our lust sect is interested in him. Auntie Gu looked at the girl in pink with a fake smile and asked teasingly. Tisk, the girl in pink pouted her lips in disdain. Raising her chin, she said confidently, if I were to appear, all I have to do is beckon with my finger and that Mo Ling would grovel at my feet obediently. Chapter 293. Auntie Gu smiled without saying anything. Suddenly, a strange energy fluctuation spread out from her glabella, sweeping through the courtyard of Mo's spirit weapon workshop slowly. That was a spirit consciousness that only Jining Jinjuan could cultivate. It was even stronger than the 5 senses of a cultivator and was unobstructed by any obstacles. Like air currents, it could spread to every corner. A moment later, Auntie Gu's expression turned extremely strange as she muttered to herself in disbelief, It's him? Who? The girl in pink leaned over and asked curiously, blinking her watery eyes. Auntie Gu smiled. Yen, this person. I'm afraid it's really useless for you to hook your finger. I don't believe it. The girl in pink pouted her lips. If I meet an old monster, I might not be able to charm him because I'm not strong enough. A young man in his 20s, full of vigor and vigor. How could he possibly escape from my grasp? Right now, I'm just worried that you'll be foolishly abducted by him with a hook of his finger. Auntie Gu shook her head and chuckled. Even a simple frown and smile was filled with charm. Auntie Gu, I won't believe you even more if you put it that way. The girl in pink pouted coquettishly and leaped into Auntie Gu's embrace, roaming her voluptuous body with both hands. If any man were to witness this scene, they would most likely be ignited with lust. Auntie Gu chuckled and waved her lotus-like arms a few times, pushing the girl in pink back. Don't doubt me. You ran away with him the previous time and didn't even reply to let me know that you were safe. You made me worry for nothing. That was a few years ago. Besides, that Su Zimo is quite fun. It's quite fun to tease him for no reason, the girl in pink giggled. Is that so? Auntie Gu smiled. In that case, this Mo Ling is quite fun as well. Ah. The girl in pink froze for a moment, unable to react. However, she could tell that there was a hidden meaning in Auntie Gu's words and could not help but tilt her head in deep thought. A moment later, she covered her mouth and nearly exclaimed. Widening her eyes, she asked, Su Zimo and Mo Ling, can't be the same person, right? That's him. Auntie Gu retracted her smile and looked in the direction of Mo's spirit weapon workshop through the curtains, saying softly, to think that I've still underestimated him. One of the two women was the general manager of the Sky Treasure Auction House, Gu Shi. The other was the saintess of the Lust sect, Demoness Ji. She was also the daughter of the Emperor of Great Zhou, the little princess of the Great Zhou dynasty. Is it really him? Demoness Ji clapped and chuckled. Auntie Gu, didn't I say that he's interesting? I really want to know how he did it. Did he rely on the ancient book of tempering? You want to go in and meet him? Gu Shi could not help but ask when she saw how eager Demoness Ji was. Yes. Just as Demoness Ji was about to bow and leave the carriage, she swept her gaze and sat back down. What's wrong? Gu Shi asked. She shook her head. My sister is over there. I'd better not go. Gu Shi chuckled and turned around, looking in the direction of Mo's spirit weapon workshop in deep thought. Number 975 bids 1 million. Number 68 bids 1.01 million. Number 32 bids 1.02 million. In just a short while, the price of the supreme grade spirit weapon had already exceeded 1 million superior grade spirit stones against the bidding of the many perfected Jin Dan beings. Most of the perfected Jin Dan beings present had not even made a bid when the price had already exceeded their limits. They could not help but feel dejected and could only watch from where they were. After the price exceeded 1 million superior grade spirit stones, the speed gradually slowed down. Each time a bid was made, the perfected Jin Dan beings would become extremely cautious and increase the price by 10,000. Under normal circumstances, the price of a supreme grade spirit weapon would only be slightly more than 1 million superior grade spirit stones. However, supreme grade spirit weapons were treasures that had a price but no supply and were rarely seen on the market. Most cultivators who could obtain supreme grade spirit weapons would use them for themselves and would not bear to sell them. Furthermore, this was a rare opportunity to customize a supreme grade spirit weapon. It was even more precious. In the first row, the 3 perfected Jin Dan beings from the 3 major sects, Iridescent Clouds Palace, Southern Mountains Sect and Azure Frost Sect, did not participate in the bidding. Seeing that the price had already risen to 1 million, perfected being Sung Lang suddenly said, let's not waste any more time. Number 1 bids 1.5 million. The moment he said that, the crowd was in an uproar. With that, the price rose by a total of 400,000 superior grade spirit stones. That was enough to make more than half of the cultivators who wanted to continue bidding give up. 1.5 million superior grade spirit stones was not something that every perfected Jin Dan being could produce. Spirit stones were consumables after all. For cultivators, the most important thing was to raise their cultivation realms. If they wanted to raise their cultivation realms, they had to expend spirit stones to cultivate. Even perfected being Yun Shan and perfected being Yi Ning's expressions changed slightly when they heard perfected being Tsang Lang's bid, let alone itinerant cultivators and perfected Jin Dan beings of small sections. After perfected being Tsang Lang's bid, a few breaths passed and no one continued to bid. Number 3 bids 1.51 million spirit stones. Right then, perfected being Yi Ning spoke and increased the price by 10,000. Perfected being Tsang Lang sneered and turned to perfected being Yun Shan, asking, fellow Taoist Yun Shan, aren't you going to bid? If you don't, you won't have another chance later on. Perfected being Yun Shan grit his teeth and said in a deep voice, number 2 bids 1.52 million. The moment he said that, perfected being Tsang Lang spoke again with a calm expression, number 1 bids 1.8 million. The moment he spoke, the price rose by almost 300,000. Perfected being Yun Shan's expression darkened as he glared fiercely at perfected being Tsang Lang. Perfected being Yi Ning took a deep breath and said slowly, number 3 bids 1.81 million. 2 million superior grade spirit stones was her upper limit. The moment it exceeded 2 million superior grade spirit stones, she would have to back down no matter what. Perfected Jin Dan beings at the back had already gone silent and were watching everything quietly. Given the price of a supreme grade spirit weapon, it was basically a fight between perfected being Sang Lang and perfected being Yi Ning. Even perfected being Yun Shan was no longer bidding. As though he could sense the pressure from perfected being Yi Ning, perfected being Sang Lang raised his brows slightly. Number 1 bids 1.85 million. When she saw perfected being Sang Lang's provocative gaze, perfected being Yi Ning made up her mind and shouted, Number 3 bids 2 million. This was her limit. If perfected being Sang Lang increased the price, she would back down. This time round, perfected being Sang Lang finally laughed and said leisurely, Fellow Taoist Yi Ning, this is your limit, right? Number 1 bids 2.01 million. Perfected being Yi Ning's eyes darkened as she shook her head. The reason why she raised the price to 2 million in one go was to create immense pressure on perfected being Sang Lang and even force him to back out of the bidding. Unfortunately, she did not succeed. 5 breaths passed and no one else raised the price. Perfected being Sang Lang surveyed his surroundings with a sharp gaze that even revealed a hint of threat. The meaning in his gaze was clear, anyone who dared to cause trouble at this moment would be making an enemy out of him, perfected being Sang Lang. Chapter 294. When perfected being Sang Lang announced the high price of 2.01 million superior grade spirit stones, there was no longer much suspense in the auction. Even perfected being Yun Shan and perfected being Yi Ning of the 5 major sects could only lower their heads helplessly, let alone the cultivators of the smaller sects or itinerant cultivators. As long as 10 breaths passed and no one raised the price, the opportunity to customize a supreme grade spirit weapon would fall on perfected being Sang Lang's head. It's basically decided. Outside the crowd, Bai Yuhan said softly. Ji Yaoshue nodded as well. Yes, judging from perfected being Sang Lang's tone and demeanor, he should have prepared more than 2 million superior grade spirit stones. Bai Yuhan smiled and said, just this momentum of being determined to win is enough to overwhelm everyone. At this moment, even if someone were to raise the price, it would be difficult for them to win against him and they might even incur his wrath. It's not worth it. That's right. 10 breaths passed as the two of them conversed. Indeed, there were more than 1,000 Jin Dan perfected beings present but no one had the strength to raise the price. The dust had settled. Perfected being Sang Lang heaved a sigh of relief. Even if he came prepared, 2 million superior grade spirit stones was not a small sum for him. At this moment, if someone were to raise the price, he could only grit his teeth and continue bidding. Thankfully, that did not happen. A look of joy flashed through perfected being Sang Lang's narrow eyes as he smiled, unable to conceal his excitement. In an alley not far away, Gushi lowered the curtains of the carriage and said softly, Let's go back. There's nothing left to see. Yes, let's go, Demoness Ji nodded as well. The coachman steered the carriage and began to turn around. The crowd in front of Mo's spirit weapon workshop began to disperse as well. Many perfected beings of Jin Dan were in low spirits and looked at the entrance of Mo's spirit weapon workshop reluctantly. Perfected being Sang Lang turned to look at perfected being Yun Shan and perfected being Yi Ning at the side and smiled gently. Thank you for letting me win. Fellow Taoist Sang Lang is rich and imposing. Indeed, we can't compare to him. Congratulations. Perfected being Yun Shan sneered and turned to leave with Shi Jian. Perfected being Yi Ning harumphed softly. Although she did not say anything, she was indignant. When he saw their expressions, perfected being Sang Lang chuckled in delight. Turning around, he raised his chin at Nian Qi and said, Hey, young lady, announce the results. Si Yutang said in a low voice, Junior sister, Master has won the bid. We might have a chance to meet Mr. Mo later. Yes. Chen Mengqi clenched her fists tightly. Her eyes revealed a trace of anticipation as she nodded. Ever since the start of the auction, Nianqi had not said a single word. He had been standing in front of the door with a calm expression, looking at the many Jin Dan perfected persons bidding below. It was only at this moment that Nianqi declared, "I hereby announce that the fellow Taoist who has obtained the right to customize a supreme-grade spirit weapon in this auction is Number 3. The crowd had already begun to disperse. However, not long after Nianqi's voice fell, everyone's footsteps gradually stopped. Their faces were filled with doubt, and their expressions were strange. Number 3. Wasn't number 3 Adept Yi Ning from the Azure Frost sect? Was it a slip of the tongue, or had he misheard? Everyone turned back instinctively. In the alley, just as the carriage was about to leave, a soft exclamation sounded from within the carriage. "Why is it number 3? A gentle voice sounded with a hint of confusion. Outside the crowd, Ji Yaoxue and Bai Yuhan exchanged glances, somewhat stunned. Bai Yuhan was confused as well. Blinking her eyes, she said, "Normally speaking, the highest bidder wins. Why did it end up in number 3's hands?" At the door, Perfected Being Sung Lang's smile froze when he heard Nianqi's voice. Perfected Being Yun Shan paused in his tracks and turned around in deep thought. Perfected Being Yi Ning froze on the spot, unable to react to the surprise that fell from the skies. "Young lady, you must have said something wrong, right?" Perfected Being Sung Lang frowned slightly, looking displeased. "That's right," Nianqi replied naturally. Perfected Being Sung Lang's expression darkened as he flipped his hand to reveal his number badge, saying in a deep voice, "Look carefully, I'm number 1. Earlier on, number 1 bid 2.01 million superior grade spirit stones. Number 1 bid the highest." "Oh," Nianqi nodded. "You're right." When he heard that, Perfected Being Sung Lang's expression softened slightly. Unexpectedly, Nianqi changed the topic and said seriously, "However, number 3 is the one who obtained the rights to customize supreme-grade spirit weapons." When the results were announced at the beginning, everyone doubted that they had heard it clearly. However, this time round, all the cultivators present heard it clearly. Something was happening. The cultivators who had already left gathered in front of Mo's spirit weapon workshop at an even faster speed. Most of them had gloating expressions as they waited to watch the show. Initially, there was no one around Perfected Being Sung Lang. In the blink of an eye, another group of people surrounded him. A mocking look flashed through Perfected Being Yun Shan's eyes as he pretended to ask with concern, "Fellow Taoist Sung Lang, what's going on?" "Humph." Perfected Being Sung Lang harumphed coldly with a terrible expression. He glared at Nianqi with a dark gaze and asked slowly, "Young lady, you're not joking with me, right?" A shuddering aura emanated from Perfected Being Sung Lang's body as it slowly pressed towards Nianqi. Everyone could tell that Perfected Being Sung Lang was truly enraged at this moment. Against Perfected Being Sung Lang's might, Nianqi's expression did not change as he asked instead, "Do I look like I'm joking?" "Alright, I want an explanation." Perfected Being Sung Lang strode forward and questioned loudly with an imposing aura that shone brightly. Perfected Being Sung Lang's aura was aggressive. Nianqi frowned and asked impatiently, "What explanation do you want?" "I was clearly the highest bidder at 2.01 million superior grade spirit stones for the rights to customize supreme grade spirit weapons. What right do you have to give it to someone else?" Perfected Being Sung Lang said slowly, "Young lady, if you didn't hear it clearly, I can repeat it to you right now. I was the one who bid the highest in the final bid. All the cultivators present can attest to that." "Oh," Nianqi replied indifferently and asked instead, "And then?" Perfected Being Sung Lang felt a dull pain in his chest as he shuddered, nearly spitting out a mouthful of blood. On one side, he was furious and on the brink of breaking down, while on the other side, he was still calm and composed. Everyone held back their laughter when they saw Perfected Being Sung Lang's pale expression. My master was the one who bid 2.01 million superior grade spirit stones. Didn't you hear it clearly? Perfected being Sung Lang's disciple, Si Yutong, could not hold it in any longer and stepped forward, hollering. Nian Qi covered his ears and hollered, "What are you hollering for? So what if you're rich?" That retort nearly choked Si Yutong to death. Finally, someone could not hold it in and burst out laughing. Perfected being Sung Lang took a deep breath of air and the muscles on his face twitched. His eyelids twitched as he grit his teeth. It's clearly the case that the highest bidder wins. I just want to ask, where are the rules of most spirit weapon workshop? Where is the fairness? Rules? Fairness? Nian Qi looked at perfected being Sung Lang with a, "You're so naive," expression. In most spirit weapon workshop, all the rules and fairness are decided by my young master. Chapter 295. By saying that my young master has the final say, he meant that even if you offered 10 million superior grade spirit stones, he would still not give it to you, let alone 2.01 million superior grade spirit stones. Perfected being Sung Lang's face darkened and his lips twitched. At that moment, he felt as though he had punched cotton and could not exert any strength at all. It was extremely uncomfortable. Sensing the mocking gazes of the crowd, Si Yutong and Shenmeng Qi felt their faces burn in shame. Si Yutong had witnessed Nian Qi's ability to choke others and was still shrouded in the shadow of, "So what if you're rich?" How would he dare to provoke her again? Shenmeng Qi was indignant and could not help but step forward to question, "Fellow Taoist, are you still being reasonable? We clearly agreed at the start that the highest bidder would get it. Don't try to reason with me." Nian Qi waved it off hurriedly and blinked her watery eyes, explaining seriously, "That's because most spirit weapon workshop has never been reasonable." Shenmeng Qi's body swayed and her face turned pale. Feeling suffocated, she was defeated. Ha 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 ha. A burst of laughter broke out from the crowd. For perfected being Yi Ning, this was truly a pleasant surprise. Perfected being Yi Ning stepped forward with a smile and cupped her fists. "Thank you, fellow Taoist Nian Qi." Nian Qi nodded. Perfected being Sung Lang tried his best to compose himself and suppress the anger in his chest, saying in a deep voice, "Young lady, since your young master has the final say, all right, I want to meet Mr. Mo." "You think you can meet him just because you say so?" Nian Qi glanced sideways at perfected being Sung Lang and sneered. "Young lady, I don't understand why the rights to customize supreme-grade spirit weapons for this auction landed in someone else's hands. However, I'll have to trouble you to inform him that perfected being Sung Lang of Iridescent Cloud's Palace is here to meet him." Perfected being Sung Lang raised his head slightly and a look of pride flashed through his eyes. "Mr. Mo must have heard of my name before. Young lady, I can understand that you're insensible. However, I'm advising you as an experienced person that you'd better not make the decision for your young master in case you get punished." Nian Qi frowned slightly and hesitated. Perfected being Sung Lang continued, "I believe that no one in the territory of the great Zhou dynasty will reject my friendship." These words were spoken with arrogance and decisiveness. Given perfected being Sung Lang's status and cultivation, he was indeed qualified to say those words. No matter what, Nian Qi was not even 20 years old and was only a foundation establishment cultivator. For a moment, he was stunned by perfected being Sung Lang's aura and could not make up his mind. Nian Qi looked hesitant. Prior to this, Su Zimo had merely instructed her to ignore any cultivators from Iridescent Cloud's palace that bid. Nian Qi didn't know the reason either. At that moment, Nian Qi felt another layer of worry in his heart when he saw how confident perfected being Sung Lang was. She acted on her own accord and created a strong enemy for her young master. Wasn't it a little rash? Fellow Taoist Nian Qi, since you've already decided, let's not. Perfected being Yi Ning hesitated. She was a little anxious, afraid that Nian Qi would go in and ask Mr. Mo and cause other changes. However, she was too embarrassed to say it too clearly. Perfected being Sung Lang spoke once more and said confidently, I dare to say that Mr. Mo will definitely change his mind if you go in and inform him. Also, if you don't have enough spirit stones, I can raise it to 2.5 million superior grade spirit stones. Pust. When they heard that, everyone could not help but gasp. He raised the price to 2.5 million in one go. Everyone could sense that perfected being Sung Lang was bent on obtaining that supreme-grade spirit weapon. When perfected being Yi Ning heard that, she sighed sadly and shook her head. If perfected being Sung Lang's bid was only 10,000 higher than hers, perfected being Sung Lang would still be confident. But now, perfected being Sung Lang had already bid 2.5 million. If perfected being Yi Ning was in Mr. Mo's shoes, she would have chosen perfected being Sung Lang. Everything else aside, the price alone was a whopping 500,000 superior grade spirit stones higher. Mr. Mo had no reason to reject it. Pondering for a moment, Nian Chi said, Hold on for a moment. I'll go in and ask my young master. Nian Chi returned to the courtyard and closed the door tightly, speeding towards Su Zimo's cultivation room. Before long, Nian Chi arrived outside Su Zimo's room and knocked gently on the door. Come in. Su Zimo's voice sounded. Nian Chi pushed the door and entered, going straight to the point. Young master, something happened at the auction. What's wrong? Su Zimo sat on the ground and asked casually without getting up. Nian Chi said, there was indeed a cultivator from Iridescent Cloud's palace outside for the auction this time round. I ignored him and gave the right to customize a supreme-grade spirit weapon to the next cultivator. Then, Nian Chi sorted out his thoughts before continuing, then, the cultivator from Iridescent Cloud's palace seemed rather powerful and said that he wanted to meet you, young master. He even said that you must have heard of his name and would definitely change your mind. Oh. Su Zimo raised his brow slightly. Right. Nian Chi continued, the cultivator from Iridescent Cloud's palace has already bid 2.5 million superior grade spirit stones, a whopping 500,000 more than the second place. That powerful? Su Zimo smiled and walked over, stretching his muscles and bones as he asked casually, what's his name? Nian Chi replied, perfected being Sung Lang. Suddenly, Su Zimo paused in his actions. What's wrong, young master? Nian Chi asked curiously. Su Zimo smiled with a hint of mockery in his eyes. He said with a slightly emotional tone, nothing much, just an old friend. Should we meet him or not? Nian Chi could not figure out what Su Zimo meant. Of course, we'll have to meet him. However, now is not the time. Su Zimo said indifferently, also, he's right about something. I have indeed changed my mind. From the looks of it, Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop seems to have some special rules. Outside the crowd, Ji Yaoshua asked with a puzzled expression. I don't know. Bai Yuhan shook her head. However, there must be a deeper meaning for Mr. Mo to set such a rule. Ji Yaoshua frowned in deep thought. Her gaze changed as she murmured softly, or perhaps, Mr. Mo has some feud with Iridescent Cloud's palace. I'm not sure if he has any feud with Iridescent Cloud's palace. However, Mr. Mo is definitely at odds with True Fire Sect, Bai Yuhan replied. In an alley not far away, in the carriage behind the carriage. Suddenly, Demoness Ji said, I recalled something. Su Zimo seems to have a feud with perfected being Sung Lang. Oh. Gu Shi was surprised. Demoness Ji recalled, back in the palace of Yen country, he killed a cultivator of Iridescent Cloud's palace on the spot. Furthermore, he got a disciple of Iridescent Cloud's palace to relay a message that he was going to take perfected being Sung Lang's life. In that case, it makes sense why there was such a strange outcome in the auction just now. Gu Shi thought for a moment and shook her head. However, Su Zimo is only a foundation establishment cultivator. He's still far from being able to take perfected being Sung Lang's life. One is a foundation establishment cultivator while the other is a Jean Dan. There's definitely a difference in strength between them. However, the two of them are comparable in terms of status, Demoness G said. Everything else aside, the weight of the words Mr. Mo alone was enough to go against perfected being Sang Lang. Now that we understand that, the outcome of Nian Qi entering and reporting, Demoness G grinned. Hee, there's a good show to watch. Chapter 296. Si Yutang said softly, Master, don't be anxious. This maidservant is inexperienced and it's understandable that she hasn't heard of your name. Mr. Mo will definitely change his mind once she reports to him. Yes. Perfected being Sang Lang nodded. He was confident that there was no reason for Mr. Mo to reject someone who offered 5 million superior grade spirit stones and choose someone else. Si Yutang turned to look at the sullen Shin Meng Qi and said gently, Junior sister, don't be angry. There's no need for us to stoop to the level of a maidservant. Right then, with a creak, the door of the courtyard opened with a crack. He's out. He's out. A commotion broke out in the crowd. Perfected being Sang Lang was not the only one. Many cultivators nearby were waiting for the final outcome as well. Nian Qi walked out with a calm expression. He looked at perfected being Sang Lang and nodded. You're right, perfected being. My young master has indeed heard of your name. Furthermore, as you expected, he has changed his mind as well. The dark clouds on perfected being Sang Lang's face dissipated and he revealed a smile once more as he looked around smugly. Perfected being Yi Ning's eyes dimmed. Although she had expected this outcome, she was still somewhat disappointed. Si Yutang was unforgiving and sneered, Little maidservant, didn't your young master ask you to apologize to my master? Nian Qi smiled without saying anything. Disperse, disperse. Some cultivators did not linger and turned to leave when they saw that there was an outcome. Nian Qi continued, my young master even said that if it's you, perfected being Sang Lang, he's willing to customize a supreme-grade spirit weapon for you for free. When he heard that, perfected being Sang Lang was elated. From 5 million spirit stones to a free customization, he felt an immense sense of happiness and pride. Is perfected being Sang Lang that amazing? That's about right. He's already at perfected Jean Dan at the age of 200. He's the one with the highest chance of advancing to Jining Zhenjuan. Perfected being Sang Lang sure is impressive to be able to customize for free. Perfected being Sang Lang felt a little smug as he listened to the discussions in the crowd and felt the envious gazes of the crowd. After all, he had lived for more than 200 years. Perfected being Sang Lang suppressed the ecstasy in his heart and tried his best to restrain himself. He nodded to his surroundings and cupped his fists. Although he pretended to be indifferent, as if he had already expected all of this, it was difficult to conceal the complacency between his brows. Ha! Perfected being Sang Lang could still hold back his excitement and pretend to be calm. However, his disciple, Si Yutang, could no longer hold it in. His face was flushed and he could not stop laughing. Nian Qi smiled. However, young master said that it's fine to help perfected being Sang Lang customize a supreme-grade spirit weapon for free, but he has another request. Speak. Perfected being Sang Lang was in a great mood as he waved his hand and declared proudly, as long as it's something that I can do, I'll definitely do my best to cooperate. Don't worry, Taoist master. This request is very easy for you. Nian Qi suddenly stopped smiling. His tone turned cold as he said word by word, young master said, he wants you to kneel. The clamor in the crowd suddenly quieted down. The entire place was so silent that one could hear a pin drop. Every single cultivator present was stunned and dumbfounded as they looked at Nian Qi and perfected being Sang Lang instinctively. He wants you to kneel. Although the place was noisy, everyone heard those words clearly and there was no mistake about it. Ji Yaoshue and Bai Yuhan were both stunned. Not far away, in a carriage in an alley, a woman's gentle voice sounded with a hint of laughter. Ha, I knew it. Su Zimo is very interesting. Si Yutang's laughter stopped abruptly. Perfected being Sung Lang's expression froze on his face as he turned around slowly. Narrowing his eyes, he asked coldly, "Young lady, what did you say earlier on? If you have the guts, say it again for me to hear." "Didn't you hear me clearly?" Nian Qi was oblivious to perfected being Sung Lang's threat and said indifferently, "As long as you kneel, young master will refine a supreme-grade spirit weapon for you." "Oh, right. Young master even said that if you kneel down and kowtow once more, young master will refine another supreme-grade spirit weapon for you." Humiliation. Although many cultivators did not know why Mr. Mo would make such a change, for perfected being Sung Lang, this was a complete humiliation. No matter how valuable a supreme-grade spirit weapon was, how could perfected being Sung Lang kneel down in front of everyone? If he were to kneel, he would definitely lose all face in the cultivation world in the future. Fufufu, suddenly, perfected being Sung Lang laughed. "How dare a mere maidservant like you insult perfected being Jean Dan as a foundation establishment cultivator? Even if this is the capital, I can still kill you right now." Perfected being Sung Lang's long and narrow eyes shone with a chilling killing intent. His hands that were initially behind his back were now on his storage bag and his voice was chilling. Everyone could sense perfected being Sung Lang's killing intent. To everyone, Nian Qi was merely a maidservant. Given perfected being Sung Lang's status and identity, he might not be punished for killing a maidservant in a domineering manner. Nian Qi's expression was unchanged as she continued, "Young master has already expected that you'll definitely fly into a rage after hearing this request and want to kill me. However, this is the capital. If you dare to make the first move, the other cultivators will have sufficient reasons to stop you." "Hee hee." Perfected being Sung Lang laughed. "Who would dare to stop me for a mere maidservant like you?" Nian Qi nodded. "That's why my young master said that he'll customize a supreme-grade spirit weapon for anyone who beheads you." Perfected being Sung Lang's expression changed. That statement was way too ruthless, it was as though he was being roasted on fire. Not only did he want to humiliate her, he wanted her to endure it with nowhere to vent. At that moment, as long as perfected being Sung Lang dared to attack Nian Qi, the other cultivators would have sufficient reasons to attack and join forces to kill him. That was because his head could be exchanged for a supreme-grade spirit weapon, who wouldn't be tempted? Even if some cultivators were wary of his prestige and did not dare to attack, the commanders of the Scarlet Vulture and Azure Falcon Guards had already walked over not far away. As long as he dared to make any strange moves, the two of them would definitely attack without hesitation. Perfected being Sung Lang's expression was extremely terrible and dark. No matter what, he had already lost all his dignity today. However, perfected being Sung Lang could not understand why Mo Ling would have such a deep hatred for him. The reason why he was able to get to where he was today was because his hands were stained with endless blood. He could no longer remember when he had a feud with cultivators with the surname Mo. From the looks of it, Mr. Mo must know me, Blue Wave. Perfected being Sung Lang was a top expert of the Jean Dan realm after all and adjusted quickly. A mocking look flashed through his eyes as he sneered, "Since we're old acquaintances, why do you have to hide inside and not meet me?" Nian Qi replied, "Young master said that we'll definitely meet, but not now." "When is that?" "The sect competition." "All right." Perfected being Sung Lang nodded and said coldly, "At that time, let's see who this Mo Ling is." Chapter 297. With that said, there was no way perfected being Sung Lang could stay any longer. With a dark expression, he turned and left with his two disciples. Following perfected being Sung Lang's departure, the surrounding cultivators dispersed as well. In the alley, the coachman drove the carriage into the distance. Outside the crowd, Ji Yaoshue and Bai Yuhan stood by the side. After watching the entire process of the auction, their expressions were somewhat emotional. Bai Yuhan said, "Did you see that? Mr. Mo toyed with perfected being Sung Lang in the palm of his hand without even appearing. The latter could only leave dejectedly. Ji Yaoshua nodded with a look of admiration in her eyes. That Mr. Mo is indeed quite impressive. He had already predicted perfected being Sung Lang's subsequent reaction and dealt with it accordingly. Pausing for a moment, Ji Yaoshua smiled. If father hadn't told me that he was only a man in his 20s, I would have thought that he was some scheming old man. Fufu. Bai Yuhan looked at Ji Yaoshua teasingly and chuckled. How is it? Are you curious about Mr. Mo now? Ji Yaoshua shook her head and smiled helplessly. Don't worry, when you meet Mr. Mo, you'll forget about that Su Zimo completely, Bai Yuhan swore. While the two of them were talking, perfected being Yi Ning had already placed 30 sets of materials for customizing supreme-grade spirit weapons and 2 million superior-grade spirit stones into her storage bag and handed it to Nian Qi. Ji Yaoshua and Bai Yuhan headed towards Mo's spirit weapon workshop. Perfected being Yi Ning seemed to be saying something to Nian Qi, but Nian Qi shook his head. Slightly disappointed, perfected being Yi Ning turned to leave. Greetings, Master. Ji Yaoshua happened to walk over and bowed slightly, saying gently. Although Ji Yaoshua was dressed normally and bowed to perfected being Yi Ning, she exuded the aura of royalty and was indescribably noble. Oh, it's Yaoshua. There's no need to bow. Taoist Master Yi Ning nodded and extended her hands to help Ji Yaoshua up. The disciples of the Azure Frost sect did not know about Ji Yaoshua's identity, but she did. Ji Yaoshua was only going to the Azure Frost sect to cultivate for 10 years. When it was time for the sect tournament, she would return to the Great Zhou Imperial City and not return to the Azure Frost sect. At this time, Ji Yaoshua had returned to the royal city. In fact, she had already regained her status as a princess. Congratulations, Master. Ji Yaoshua said with a smile. Hee hee. Perfected being Yi Ning could not hide the joy in her eyes as she smiled. It was also a coincidence. Who would have thought that Mr. Mo would choose me in the end? Bai Yuhan asked, fellow Taoist Yi Ning, what did you say to Nian Qi just now? I mentioned that I wanted to meet Mr. Mo and thank him in person. Unfortunately, he did not agree and rejected me directly. Perfected being Yi Ning laughed bitterly. Ji Yaoshua consoled, from what fellow Taoist Nian Qi said, Mr. Mo will definitely show up for the sect tournament. You'll definitely be able to meet him then. Yes, I hope so. The three of them chatted for a while more before perfected being Yi Ning just now left. Ji Yaoshua turned around and smiled. See, he's the #1 weapon refinement master of the Great Zhou Imperial City. He's not someone you can meet just because you want to. Even my master was rejected. Let's give it a try. What if it works? Bai Yuhan teased, at most, we'll just announce your title as the third princess. Who knows, we might be able to control the situation. Sister Bai, you're teasing me again, Ji Yaoshua shook her head and chuckled. The two of them went forward and Bai Yuhan knocked on the door. Before long, the door opened and Nian Qi popped her head out. Blinking her watery eyes, she looked at Ji Yaoshua and Bai Yuhan curiously. The auction is over. Fellow Taoists, you're late. Ji Yaoshua smiled gently. Fellow Taoist, we're not here to participate in the auction. Previously, the Empress of Great Zhou ordered a supreme-grade spirit weapon from Mr. Mo and I'm here to retrieve it. Oh. Nian Qi came to a realization and her gaze swept across Bai Yuhan. She recognized that this was the commander of the White Hawk Guards. Since the yellow-robed woman was traveling with Bai Yuhan, there should be no mistake about it. Please wait a moment, the two of you. That supreme-grade spirit weapon is with the young master. I'll retrieve it right away. Nian Qi said and was about to close the door. Hey! Hey! When Bai Yuhan saw that Ji Yaoshua was indifferent and did not mention anything about meeting Mo Ling, she called out to Nian Qi hurriedly and coughed gently. Fellow Taoist Nian Qi, can we enter together and visit Mr. Mo? After all, we've admired him for a long time. No, you can't. Nianqi shook her head without hesitation. Pausing for a moment, Nianqi looked at Bai Yuhan and asked in confusion, Commander Bai, haven't you met my young master before? I've met him, but she hasn't. Bai Yuhan pointed to Ji Yaoxue who was beside her. That won't do either. Nianqi still shook her head and closed the door. Right, she's the third princess of the great Zhou dynasty. Hey! Bai Yuhan shouted hurriedly, not knowing if Nianqi heard her. Ji Yaoxue could not help but chuckle. Sister Bai, stop shouting. He's ignoring you. Even if you don't find it embarrassing, I'm scared. Bai Yuhan pouted. So be it. What's the big deal? After a while, the door opened once more and Nianqi appeared in a flash, looking at Ji Yaoxue with a curious gaze. Where's the supreme grade spirit weapon? Let's take it and leave. Bai Yuhan was indignant after being rejected twice by Nianqi. Nianqi said, the spirit weapon is in the hands of my young master. Bai Yuhan frowned and asked, where did you go earlier on? Nianqi bowed slightly and made an inviting gesture with a smile. My young master invites the two of you. Ji Yaoxue and Bai Yuhan were stunned. Initially, both of them thought that it was impossible for them to meet Mr. Mo. But now, there was such a reversal. Mr. Mo's thoughts were really unfathomable. Ji Yaoxue was rather calm and had a calm expression. To her, it did not matter whether she met him or not. However, Bai Yuhan smiled and grabbed Ji Yaoxue's wrist happily, urging, let's go, this is a rare opportunity. Under Nianqi's lead, the two of them entered the most mysterious residence in the capital of Great Zhou. The houses in the courtyard were arranged in a picturesque manner. The courtyard was clean and simple with a neat lawn. Not far away, there was a stone table and a few stone stools, there was nothing else. A gigantic black dog covered in scales sprawled by the Jishui River, as though it was taking a nap with its eyes closed. Please take a seat. Nianqi brought the two of them to the stone table and saw that there was already a pot of tea on the table, emitting steam and a fragrant aroma. Ji Yaoxue and Bai Yuhan sat down as instructed and Nianqi poured a cup of tea for each of them. When she saw Nianqi in such a state, Bai Yuhan felt a little uneasy. Although Nianqi was a maidservant on the surface, there were not many cultivators in the capital of Great Zhou who could get her to serve them tea. Sister Yaoxue, it's really you. Right then, an exclamation sounded from not far away. Ji Yaoxue turned around and saw Su Xiaoning sprinting over with a delighted expression. Xiaoning, why are you here? Ji Yaoxue was stunned. At this moment, another voice sounded. It was as gentle as jade. Miss Ji, how have you been? Chapter 298. Ji Yaoxue's petite body shuddered as she turned to look. Not far away, a scholarly-looking cultivator strode over. His green robes fluttered in the wind, his eyes were clear and there was a faint smile on his lips. Ji Yaoxue was stunned. For a moment, she was in a daze and remained silent for a long time. For some reason, Ji Yaoxue felt a lump in her throat and her eyes reddened. That figure had appeared in her mind countless times. Now that she was seeing him, she felt that it was surreal. It was as though there were no other sounds in her ears except for that single sentence. Miss Ji, how have you been? Great. So, you've known Mr. Mo for a long time. You've been hiding it from me. Bai Yuhan leaned over to Ji Yaoxue and whispered. When she heard that, Ji Yaoxue gradually snapped out of her daze. The green-robed man had already arrived. Greetings, Mr. Mo. Bai Yuhan stood up hurriedly and cupped her fists. The green-robed man merely nodded and shifted his gaze back to Ji Yaoxue's beautiful face with a hint of a smile in his eyes. Bai Yuhan looked at Ji Yaoxue and then at the green-robed man. She could not understand what was going on. If the two of them knew each other, why were they not saying anything? If they did not know each other, what did Mr. Mo mean by that just now? You're Mr. Mo? After a while, Ji Yaoshue finally spoke. I think so, the green-robed man nodded. Then should I call you young Master Su, Mr. Mo, or Zimo? Up to you. The moment he said that, the two of them exchanged glances and smiled as though they had a telepathic connection, just like before. Have a seat. Su Zimo pointed to a stone stool at the side and sat down with Ji Yaoshue. Bai Yuhan froze on the spot and had yet to snap back to her senses. What young Master Su? What Zimo? Turning around, Bai Yuhan hurried back to Ji Yaoshue's side and asked in confusion, Yaoshue, what do you mean by young Master Su and Zimo? This is Mo Ling, Mr. Mo. Ji Yaoshue smiled but did not say anything. She turned to look at Su Zimo. Su Zimo glanced at Bai Yuhan and said frankly, let's get to know each other again. I am Su Zimo. Which Su Zimo? Bai Yuhan was a little confused as she asked subconsciously. Yen Kingdom, Su Zimo. Ah! Bai Yuhan exclaimed with a face filled with disbelief. You're that cripple Su Zimo who can't cultivate and has no spirit root? Upon hearing the word cripple, Ji Yaoshue frowned. She glanced sideways and said softly, Sister Bai. Nian Qi looked unhappy and couldn't help but say, Commander Bai, how can you say that? If my young master is a cripple, then who in this world isn't a cripple? How is that possible? For a moment, Bai Yuhan found it hard to accept. Her gaze darted back and forth between Su Zimo, Ji Yaoshue, Nian Qi, and Su Xiaoning. However, she realized that none of them seemed to be joking. In Bai Yuhan's impression, Su Zimo from Yen Kingdom and Mr. Mo before her were existences from two completely different worlds. One was in the skies, the #1 weapon refinement master of the Great Zhou dynasty. He was so famous that almost all the perfected Jin Dan wanted to befriend him. The other was underground, from a small vassal state in a remote place. Without a spirit root, he could not cultivate and was the most ordinary mortal in the mortal world. How did the two of them end up as one? Su Zimo smiled and said indifferently, that's right. There are many things in this world that are impossible. Changing the topic, Ji Yaoshue asked curiously, why are you called Mo Ling? Su Zimo pointed to the plaque on the door. Mo Ling is only the name of the weapon workshop. Everyone instinctively thought that my name was Mo Ling. I couldn't be bothered to explain and that's how it spread. To think that you've changed so much after a few years. You've already become the famous Mr. Mo in the capital. It's hard to even meet you, Ji Yaoshue teased. Su Zimo smiled as well. How would I dare to not meet the third princess of the Great Zhou dynasty when you've already announced yourself, ! Ji Yaoshue covered her mouth and chuckled. Rolling her eyes at Bai Yuhan, she said, it's all because Sister Bai called me that. In Bai Yuhan's eyes, ever since she met Su Zimo, Ji Yaoshue seemed to have changed into a different person. The worry in her eyes was gone and her beautiful eyes were like water. She smiled sweetly and was indescribably beautiful. Ji Yaoshue thought for a moment and said, right, father has a high opinion of you as well. You're talking about Mo Ling, right? Su Zimo's tone was calm. It's the same anyway. You guys are the same person, Ji Yaoshue said. Su Zimo smiled and did not say anything. He knew very well that if the Emperor of Great Zhou discovered that he was Mo Ling, it would be hard to tell what his attitude towards him would be. The Emperor's heart was unpredictable. If the Emperor of Great Zhou wanted to kill him in a fit of rage, he would be able to find sufficient reasons to do so. Is the supreme grade spirit weapon custom made for you, Your Majesty? Su Zimo asked. Yes. Ji Yaoshue nodded and extended her palm with a smile. Hand it over. Let me take a look at Mr. Mo's custom-made flying sword and see if it's to my liking. Su Zimo smiled and took out a flying sword from his storage bag. The sword was 3 feet long and 2 feet wide. It was engraved with mysterious patterns that could be said to be the work of the gods and was beautiful. Su Zimo injected spirit energy into it. Whoosh! For spirit patterns lit up on the sword in a bedazzling manner. For spirit patterns, supreme grade. A look of envy flashed through Bai Yuhan's eyes as she looked at the flying sword. Although she was the commander of the White Hawk Guards, she did not have a single supreme grade spirit weapon. Ji Yaoxue received the flying sword with both hands and brushed her fingers across it. Although she felt the coldness of the sword, her heart was filled with warmth. Ji Yaoxue brushed her fingertips across the tip of the sword and flicked it gently. The sword trembled and let out a clear hum. Just the hum alone was enough to tell that the flying sword was a top-notch creation even among supreme-grade spirit weapons and was infinitely close to being a perfect spirit weapon. Su Zimo took out a pale yellow robe from his storage bag and handed it to Ji Yaoxue. This robe is for you as well. Ji Yaoxue received it. The pale yellow robe was extremely thin and light, giving off a slight chill to the touch. Ji Yaoxue's heart skipped a beat as she injected spirit energy into the robe. Whoosh! For spirit lights burst forth from the robe in a dazzling manner. Ah! Almost at the same time, Ji Yaoxue and Bai Yuhan exclaimed. It was another supreme-grade spirit weapon. Furthermore, it was a rare defensive supreme-grade spirit weapon. The contours of the robe seemed as though it was custom-made for Ji Yaoxue. At that moment, Bai Yuhan was no longer envious, she was jealous. That was way too extravagant. Who would gift a supreme-grade spirit weapon right off the bat? Ji Yaoxue lowered her head and pretended to size up the robe in her hands. Her cheeks were slightly flushed and her heart was in a mess. When he noticed Ji Yaoxue's expression, Su Zimo frowned slightly. The reason why he gave her the robe was because he saw Ji Yaoxue as a good friend. Furthermore, Ji Yaoxue was indebted to him and the Su family. Su Zimo did not want to cause Ji Yaoxue to misunderstand. Pondering for a moment, Su Zimo said in a seemingly casual manner, I happened to buy some 1,000-year-old heavenly silkworm silk a while ago and used it to refine 3 robes. Apart from you, Xiaoning and Nian Qi have them as well. When she heard that, Ji Yaoxue's eyes dimmed. However, Ji Yaoxue recovered before long. By the time she raised her head, she was already smiling. Thank you. Chapter 299. Xiaoning blinked and could tell that the atmosphere between the two of them was a little off. She tugged at Ji Yaoxue's hand and smiled. Sister Yaoxue, why are you only back now? I missed you. Ji Yaoxue rubbed Xiaoning's forehead and asked gently, how was your stay at Azure Frost Elixir Workshop? Did anyone bully you? Su Xiaoning froze for a moment and dodged her gaze before smiling. No, my senior brothers and sisters have been taking care of me. Ji Yaoxue exclaimed softly. Even though Xiaoning hid it well, she still noticed some clues. Ji Yaoxue turned to Su Zimo and asked with a frown, Zimo, what happened? Nothing, Sister Yaoxue. Don't ask anymore, Su Xiaoning replied hurriedly. Ji Yaoxue smiled indifferently. Even if you and your brother don't tell me, who can hide the matters of the great Zhou dynasty from me if I want to know? It's nothing much. There's a cultivator called Yang Yu in Azure Frost Elixir Workshop who has a grudge against you. Su Zimo did not elaborate further. Back at Azure Frost Elixir Workshop, Su Zimo had already told Yang Yu that someone would deal with her. It's her. A cold glint flashed through Ji Yaoxue's eyes as her aura changed. I've already warned that Yang Yu not to provoke me. It was only at this moment that one could sense the unique might and killing intent of the royal family from Ji Yaoxue. After all, the bloodline of the emperor flowed in her body, the emperor of Great Zhou who could kill 1,000,000 people in a fit of rage. Right then, a group of red dots flew over from the voids not far away at an extremely fast speed. By the looks of it, they were heading towards Mo's spirit weapon workshop. Bai Yuhan frowned. It's the Scarlet Vulture Guards. Why are they here at this time? Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he vaguely guessed something. Before long, dozens of Scarlet Vulture Guards arrived outside Mo's spirit weapon workshop. Their leader was bald without eyebrows. It was the commander of the Scarlet Vulture Guards, Bald Vulture. Bald Vulture rode on a scarlet vulture and cupped his fists expressionlessly. The king has ordered for the third princess to return to the palace. In addition, the king is hosting a banquet at the Rain Admiration Pavilion and invites Mr. Mo to attend. Ji Yaoxue frowned. She could see some problems in Vulture's eyes. Commander Vulture, did Imperial Father mention why he invited Mr. Mo? Ji Yaoxue stared into Vulture's eyes and asked loudly. Vulture bowed slightly, avoiding Ji Yaoxue's gaze, and said, I don't know. Ji Yaoxue's heart sank. She grew up in the palace and knew everything about it. She could sense a faint killing intent from Bald Vulture. This murderous intent was definitely not directed at her. It goes without saying who it was directed at. Don't go. Ji Yaoxue turned around with a grim expression and shook her head at Su Zimo. Su Zimo smiled indifferently. Actually, he had expected this day to come. More than a month ago, when he met Su Xiaoning in the capital, he had already guessed that given the emperor's intentions, he would find out about his true identity sooner or later. Furthermore, there was no way he could hide his identity during the sect competition. Su Zimo had never thought of hiding it either. Now that the emperor was hosting a banquet and the Scarlet Vulture Guards had appeared, it was basically certain that his identity was exposed. This was clearly a hangmen banquet. However, Su Zimo had no choice but to go. This was the capital of Great Zhou and he had no other choice. I'll accompany you. Ji Yaoxue also realized that even if Su Zimo refused to go, the Scarlet Vulture Guards would forcefully bring him over. At that time, the situation might be even worse. Stay here and wait for me to return. Don't worry. Su Zimo turned around and instructed Nian Qi and Xiaoning before glancing at Night Spirit who was sprawled in a corner. Let's go. Su Zimo, Ji Yaoxue, and Bai Yuhan each sat on a scarlet vulture and sped towards the palace under Bald Vulture's lead. A moment later, everyone arrived at the palace. Flying was prohibited in the palace and everyone leaped down from the scarlet vultures. Bald Vulture bowed. Third princess, please return. I'll bring Mr. Mo to the banquet right away. I'll go too. Although Ji Yaoxue's tone was calm, it was unquestionable. Bald Vulture frowned and said in a deep voice, Third princess, please don't make things difficult for me. I'm only following orders. Oh. Ji Yaoxue asked indifferently, do you have a problem with me making things difficult for you? Bald Vulture's heart skipped a beat as he replied hurriedly, I wouldn't dare. Ji Yaoxue turned around with a sharp gaze and a domineering aura. She questioned, your orders are to bring Mr. Mo over. Does my following conflict with your mission? This. Bald Vulture was speechless. In the palace of Great Zhou, Ji Yaoxue seemed to have turned into a different person, exuding the dominance and might unique to the royal family with a sharp edge. Ji Yaoxue asked again, I've just returned from Azure Frost Sect and haven't had a meal with father for a long time. Today, he's holding a banquet and I want to join him for a meal. Are you going to stop me? I wouldn't dare. Ji Yaoxue's 3 consecutive questions had Bald Vulture breaking out in cold sweat. Ji Yaoxue waved it off. Lead the way. Yes. Bald Vulture hesitated for a moment and glared at Su Zimo with a dark gaze before lowering his head reluctantly. Everyone headed towards the Rain Admiration Pavilion. Before long, they arrived at the entrance of the Rain Admiration Pavilion. On the small path between the pools, Imperial Army soldiers stood guard on both sides with cold expressions. They wielded long sabers and axes and exuded a faint stench of blood. These were Imperial Army soldiers that had truly experienced the baptism of blood on the battlefield. The Imperial Army soldiers were all at perfected foundation establishment and were even stronger than Su Zimo. As for how many meridians they had unlocked, the spirit-peering art could not tell. The other Scarlet Vulture guards remained outside. Su Zimo, Ji Yaoshua, Bald Vulture, and Bai Yuhan passed through the Imperial Army and entered the Rain Admiration Pavilion. The moment he entered, Su Zimo felt a murderous aura. There was a circle of cultivators around the Rain Admiration Pavilion. All of them were at Jin Dan realm and they glared at Su Zimo expressionlessly with cold gazes. In the middle of the Rain Admiration Pavilion, there was a table with plates of exquisite dishes that were still steaming. On the seat facing the door sat an indescribably noble middle-aged man in the robes of the emperor. His forehead was broad and his gaze was deep. His expression was calm and one could not tell if he was happy or angry. The Emperor of Great Zhou. The emperor's gaze was fixed on Su Zimo's face for a long time, as though he was scrutinizing and trying to figure out who this green-robed scholar before him was. The emperor's gaze was sharp as a knife. Coupled with the fact that he had been on the throne for a long time, there was naturally a dignity in his gaze that looked down on the masses. Even cultivators would not dare to meet his gaze. However, Su Zimo had a calm expression and met the emperor's gaze without any intention of avoiding. Prior to this, Su Zimo might have been a little guilty. However, in the past 3 years, Su Zimo's reputation in the capital of Great Zhou with the name of Mo Ling had grown and accumulated his influence. Coupled with the fact that Su Zimo was someone with a sharp edge to begin with, the emperor's dignity could not suppress him. Chapter 300. The emperor retracted his gaze from Su Zimo and just now, the pressure disappeared instantly, as though everything was just an illusion. Shua, come here. The emperor turned his head slightly and looked at Ji Yaoshua, smiling as he beckoned with his hand. Ji Yaoshua frowned slightly and did not move. The emperor asked with a smile, "Why? You don't want to eat with me?" At that moment, the emperor had a benevolent expression as he looked at Ji Yaoshua with a doting gaze. He looked like a slightly older father. Even though he could not sense any killing intent or hostility from the emperor, Su Zimo's spirit perception told him that this person was extremely dangerous. Furthermore, he was on the brink of death. Ji Yaoshua had a hesitant expression. After a moment of hesitation, she walked over slowly and sat beside the emperor. "Father, Mr. Mo is, let's eat." Before Ji Yaoshua could finish, she was interrupted by the emperor. His tone was calm but no one could refute him. With that said, the emperor ate the dishes on the table as though no one was around. He ate elegantly and slowly without making any sound. At that moment, even Ji Yaoshua could not figure out the emperor's thoughts. Ji Yaoshua glanced at Su Zimo and felt uneasy. Even though she was eating symbolically, it tasted like wax. Su Zimo seemed to have become an extra person in the Rain Admiration Pavilion. It was as though the emperor had forgotten about him and left him on the spot. Su Zimo smiled indifferently and was not annoyed. With one hand behind his back, he strolled to the side and looked at the beautiful scenery outside in a relaxed manner. Time passed bit by bit and the Rain Admiration Pavilion was silent. Su Zimo seemed to be completely immersed in the beautiful scenery and had forgotten everything around him. At that moment, Bai Yuhan nodded secretly with a look of admiration. Not everyone could maintain such a calm demeanor in front of the emperor of the Great Zhou dynasty. A long time later, the emperor wiped his mouth as a shuddering cold glint flashed in his eyes. Ji Yaoshua put down his bowl and chopsticks. He coughed lightly and said, "Let's go." Ji Yaoshua's words were partly to summon the maids to remove the dishes, and partly to remind Su Zimo. Su Zimo gradually regained his senses and returned to a spot not far away from the emperor. "Should I call you Mr. Mo, or Su Zimo?" The emperor suddenly spoke and asked straightforwardly without any concealment. Su Zimo said, "Either one is fine. It all depends on your majesty." Bang! The emperor's palm suddenly slammed down heavily on the table with a loud bang. Ji Yaoshua was shocked. "Su Zimo, do you know your crime? The emperor slammed the table and stood up. Suddenly, his aura changed and he was like an enraged lion, exuding a massive might that swept over like a tidal wave. These words were like a great bell, deafening to the ears. Su Zimo's figure swayed. Under the emperor's might, Su Zimo felt as though he was suffocating and could be beheaded at any moment. Father. Ji Yaoshue's expression changed as she stood up hurriedly. Don't interfere in this matter. Without even looking, the emperor waved his sleeves gently and sent Ji Yaoshue to the side. It was unknown what sort of dermic art was used, but Ji Yaoshue could not move at all. However, she was agitated and her eyes were filled with endless worry, unable to speak. Su Zimo closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, they were sparkling and shimmering. What crime have I committed? Su Zimo asked instead. The emperor's gaze was dark as he said slowly, you hid your identity in front of me. That's a grave crime of deceiving the emperor and deserves to be beheaded. Everyone in the Rain Admiration Pavilion could sense the emperor's killing intent. However, Su Zimo's expression was unchanged as he replied calmly, Your Majesty has never asked me about the matter of hiding. How can you talk about that? Nonsense. The emperor shouted, back then at Most Spirit Weapon Workshop, I asked you personally which sect you were from and who your master was. How dare you quibble now that things have come to this? Su Zimo replied indifferently, Your Majesty, you were incognito the other day. How would I know your identity? There's naturally no way to talk about the matter of hiding. The emperor frowned slightly. The meaning behind Su Zimo's words was simple, the source of this matter was not him, but the emperor. Right from the beginning, the emperor had never asked about Su Zimo's background in his capacity as the emperor. As such, the latter naturally could not be considered as deceiving the emperor. No matter what, Su Zimo had saved Ji Yaoshue's life before. Furthermore, Su Zimo's other identity was Mr. Mo, who was famous throughout the capital. Logically speaking, the emperor should not have killed Su Zimo. However, the moment the emperor found out about the truth, he felt a sense of shame as though he had been deceived. He was indignant about letting Su Zimo leave just like that. He wanted to kill him, but at the same time, he did not want to kill him. The emperor's inner conflict was at its peak. Therefore, if he wanted to kill Su Zimo, he had to find a reason that could convince him. Right from the start, when Su Zimo stepped into the Rain Admiration Pavilion, his spirit perception had sensed an intense danger. That was because the emperor had already intended to kill him and was merely lacking a reason. Therefore, the emperor left Su Zimo where he was. As long as Su Zimo did not deal with it properly, the emperor would strike immediately and kill him on the spot. Under normal circumstances, someone at Su Zimo's age would be the most impetuous. Coupled with the fact that he was the #1 weapon refinement master of the Great Zhou dynasty, he would definitely be enraged to be ignored as such. He would either step forward to reason with the emperor or leave in a huff. Regardless of the choice, Su Zimo would definitely die. However, he was neither angry nor frustrated. He walked to the side calmly and looked at the scenery outside. Helpless, the emperor could only make things difficult for him once more and pin down the crime of deceiving the emperor as a reason to kill Su Zimo. However, Su Zimo resolved it with just a few words, leaving the emperor with no reason to refute. Although it seemed like a verbal exchange, there were sabers and swords behind it. Any mistake and Su Zimo would stain the Rain Admiration Pavilion with blood. Ji Yaoshue, who had seen through everything, heaved a sigh of relief and her expression relaxed. Very good. The emperor nodded expressionlessly. His tone was cold and one could not tell if it was praise or mockery. Let's put aside the matter of deceiving the emperor first. The emperor's gaze was cold as he asked coldly, do you admit to killing the Imperial Army Guard, Dai Su? Actually, as long as this matter was investigated carefully, Su Zimo would definitely be implicated. Back then, Dai Su caught sight of Su Zimo's figure outside the Rain Admiration Pavilion and followed him. That night, he died. It was obvious who the murderer was. Su Zimo pondered for a moment before nodding. I was the one who killed him. All right. The emperor shouted with a cold glint in his eyes, since you admit to it, there's nothing more to say. A life for a life. Su Zimo raised his head and looked at the emperor, asking instead, Dai Su wanted to kill me. Why can't I kill him? As long as someone wants to kill you, you'll retaliate. The emperor raised his brow. Yes. Su Zimo did not hesitate. Suddenly, the emperor narrowed his eyes and asked slowly, if I want to kill you now, what do you want? When she heard that question, Ji Yaoshue shuddered. That was an unsolvable question. No matter how Su Zimo answered, it would be wrong. If Su Zimo showed weakness and did not dare to retaliate, he would have to renege on what he said just now and the emperor could go with the flow to kill him. If Su Zimo's attitude was firm and he dared to retaliate and kill the emperor, that would be regicide and he would definitely die. It was an unsolvable situation. Chapter 301. Now that I want to kill you, what do you want? The emperor's question was like a sharp sword that pierced over, sealing off all of Su Zimo's escape routes. His killing intent rumbled and was almost corporeal. Shrouded by that killing intent, Su Zimo could not move at all. The Rain Admiration Pavilion was eerily silent. Even Bai Yuhan who was standing at the side felt her heart skip a beat, let alone Su Zimo who was at the heart of the storm. The emperor's cultivation was unfathomable to begin with. Coupled with the emperor's unique aura, how could any ordinary person withstand such pressure? If it was perfected Jin Dan, he would have knelt on the ground in fear as well. However, Su Zimo stood there magnanimously with a straight back, neither servile nor overbearing. You want to kill me? Su Zimo finally spoke and paused for a moment. Everyone's hearts skipped a beat. Ji Yaoshue could vaguely sense something and was so anxious that she was on the verge of tears. Su Zimo raised his head with a deep gaze that emitted a demonic glint. Looking back, he said slowly, since you want to kill me, I'll kill you first. What are you guys doing? Before he could finish his sentence, a gentle voice sounded from outside the Rain Admiration Pavilion. It was soft and pleasant, interrupting Su Zimo. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat, that voice sounded familiar. Everyone turned towards the source of the voice. A young girl in a pale pink dress stood gracefully with her head tilted. Her oval face was innocent as she looked at the Rain Admiration Pavilion curiously with a pure gaze. When he saw the young girl, the killing intent in the emperor's eyes vanished instantly. Although he was still suppressing Su Zimo with his aura, his gaze turned gentle, as though he was afraid of scaring the young girl. Yen, why are you here? The emperor's tone was reproachful and doting. The girl in pink said coquettishly, I heard that sister is back. I missed her so I came to take a look. Sister, why are you crying and standing there motionless? The girl in pink walked into the Rain Admiration Pavilion and saw the sobbing Ji Yaoshue beside her. She frowned in confusion and asked innocently. Without batting an eyelid, the emperor released an invisible energy wave from his glabella, removing the restraints on Ji Yaoshue. The emperor said in a deep voice, Shue, leave this place with Yen first. I'm not leaving. With tears in her eyes, Ji Yaoshue looked at the emperor stubbornly and shook her head resolutely. Ah! Right then, the girl in pink suddenly exclaimed. She covered her cherry lips and looked at Su Zimo in disbelief. Her eyes were filled with surprise. Su, young Master Su, it's you. The girl in pink ran to Su Zimo's side with an agitated look on her face. She grabbed his arm tightly and refused to let go, as though she was afraid that he would disappear before her eyes the next moment. Dumbfounded. Apart from Su Zimo, everyone in the Rain Admiration Pavilion was stunned on the spot, watching everything with dumbfounded expressions. The emperor was stunned as well and instinctively removed the pressure on Su Zimo, afraid that he would accidentally injure the girl in pink. Su Zimo was still rather calm. The moment the girl in pink entered, he had already recognized her. She was the demoness of the fiend's sex, pure maiden sect, Demoness G. However, the Demoness G before him looked innocent and charming. Her eyes were clear, like a young girl who was uninvolved in the affairs of the world. If not for the fact that both of them looked identical, Su Zimo would not have dared to confirm it. However, on second thought, Su Zimo realized that Demoness G did indeed possess such capabilities. Whether it was naive, charming, dignified and elegant, or delicate and pitiful, she could play them all with ease without any flaws. It was as though there were countless split personalities hidden within Demoness G's body that she could switch between at will. Su Zimo did not reply. He did not know what Demoness G was up to. Young Master Su, I've been looking for you painstakingly. To think that you would be here. Demoness G tugged at Su Zimo's sleeves and pouted her pink lips, saying in an aggrieved manner. Yen, you. Pausing for a moment, the Emperor pointed at Su Zimo with a strange expression and asked, You know this person? I don't. Demoness G shook her head. I only know that his surname is Su and I don't know his name. However, young Master Su has saved my life before. Ah. The Emperor's mouth opened slightly, dumbfounded. His expression froze on his face and his mind was in a mess. The Imperial Army, Bald Vulture, Bai Yuhan and the others at the side lost their composure as their eyes widened and their jaws nearly dropped to the ground. What was up with Su Zimo? The Emperor only had 2 daughters and he had saved both of them before. Was this man born to save princesses? Ji Yaoshue was a little confused as well as she blinked her watery eyes at everything before her. Su Zimo had even saved her sister before. The Emperor coughed gently and regained his composure, asking with a frown, Yen, what's going on? When did he save you? In Chiyu City. Demoness G replied, 3 years ago, I went to Chiyu City with Auntie Gu to play. There was once when I snuck out while Auntie Gu wasn't around. To think that I would have met 6 bad guys. If young Master Su hadn't appeared, I would have been doomed. With that said, Demoness G seemed to have a lingering fear as she vomited. Her words were half true and half false. If not for the fact that Su Zimo had experienced it personally, he would not have suspected it. Furthermore, judging from the Emperor and Ji Yaoshue's expressions, Su Zimo realized that the 2 of them did not know about Demoness G's sect at all. This child. The Emperor shook his head exasperatedly. Demoness G continued, later on, I chased after young Master Su to ask about his residence and background so that you could reward him heavily. However, young Master Su left straight away and I couldn't find him even after searching for a long time. Ah, I've got it. Demoness G revealed a look of realization and clapped with a smile. Father, did you find young Master Su specifically to reward him after knowing about this? The Emperor remained silent and smiled bitterly internally. Be it Su Zimo deceiving the Emperor or killing the Imperial Army, this man had saved his 2 daughters at the end of the day. Initially, the Emperor's attitude towards Su Zimo was already complicated and he was not resolute in killing the latter. Now that this matter had happened, the Emperor had completely given up on killing Su Zimo. However, he was worried about something else. The Emperor's gaze shifted between his 2 daughters and Su Zimo's group of 3 as he sighed internally. After pondering for a moment, the Emperor said in a deep voice, Yen, I have something else to discuss with Su Zimo. It's been a long time since you've seen your sister. The 2 of you should head out first. But what about him? It wasn't easy for me to meet young Master Su. I can't let him escape again. Demoness G pouted and wrapped her arms around Su Zimo's arms, hugging him tightly. The 2 soft arms squeezed with a hint of warmth and elasticity, causing Su Zimo's body to stiffen. The Emperor said helplessly, Don't worry, I'll let him go after speaking to him for a while. Thank you, Father. Demoness G smiled sweetly and walked to the side with a gentle voice. Holding Ji Yaoshue's petite hand, she smiled. Let's go, sister. Let's wait outside. Yes. Ji Yaoshua nodded. Since the emperor was willing to say that, Su Zimo's life was naturally not in danger and Ji Yaoshua was finally relieved. The two sisters left the Rain Admiration Pavilion hand in hand. Chapter 302. All of you can leave as well. After Ji Yaoshua and her sister left the Rain Admiration Pavilion, the emperor waved his hand. Bald Vulture, Bai Yuhan and the Imperial Army guards bowed and left as well, leaving only the emperor and Su Zimo in the pavilion. Aren't you unable to cultivate because you don't have a spirit root? There were some opportunities that happened by accident. Who taught you those skills? I'm a disciple of Misty Peak. Misty Peak. Very good. That's rare. The emperor nodded. Although Misty Peak was one of the 5 major sects, there were almost no amazing disciples in terms of weapon refinement. If Su Zimo had not admitted it personally, the emperor would not have thought that the #1 weapon refinement master of Great Zhou was from Misty Peak. Su Zimo, Mo Ling Fufu. The emperor laughed and said in a self-deprecating manner, to think that the cripple in my heart would be able to stir up so much trouble right under my nose and achieve such great accomplishments. To be fair, Su Zimo's current reputation in the capital was partly due to his own capabilities in weapon refinement. However, half of it was due to the emperor as well. In fact, Su Zimo's true fame only spread after the emperor's announcement. At that moment, most Spirit Weapon Workshop trampled on True Fire Weapon Workshop completely. Furthermore, all the cultivators in the capital knew that the Emperor of Great Zhou was backing most Spirit Weapon Workshop. Anyone who dared to target Mo Ling would be challenging the Emperor's authority. After that, the reason why Su Zimo was able to leave unscathed after killing someone on the streets was also because he had the Emperor's protection. Therefore, the reason why the Emperor wanted to kill Su Zimo was not only because he was enraged after learning the truth, but also because he felt like he was being used and deceived. As the Emperor, it was easy to imagine how enraged he was at the time when he was toyed with by a cripple in his heart. However, no matter what, Su Zimo had saved both of his daughters. The Emperor's killing intent gradually dissipated as well. Instead, he felt a little emotional. Under such pressure, this young man in his 20s was still able to maintain his composure, and even had a hint of a sharp counterattack. It was truly rare. Throwing away his initial prejudices, the Emperor admired Su Zimo. However, behind this admiration, the Emperor had more concerns. On the one hand, he was worried that Su Zimo was too close to the 2 princesses and might have other plans. On the other hand, looking at Shui Er and Yan Er's expressions, they seemed to have a good impression of Su Zimo. How should he choose? He couldn't possibly give both of them to this brat as Dao companions. How could there be such a good thing in this world? The Emperor asked, what happened in Chiyu City back then? Who were the 6 people who attacked Yan Er? I don't know. Su Zimo shook his head and said, at that time, I happened to come across her by chance, so I saved Ji Yao. Miss Ji. Since Demoness Ji chose to hide it, Su Zimo naturally could not reveal the truth. The Emperor nodded and asked in a seemingly casual manner, there are no outsiders here. Tell me, how do you feel about Shui Er and Yan Er? Su Zimo replied, the 3rd princess has helped me and the Su family before. I view her as a benefactor and a close friend. As for the little princess, I'm not familiar with her either. We've only met by chance. One was a close friend and the other was not. The Emperor could sense that Su Zimo was speaking the truth. In other words, his 2 initial concerns were gone. Instead, Su Zimo's attitude made the Emperor indignant. Both of his daughters were beautiful and of noble birth, how could they not be compatible with Su Zimo? Yet, he had no other intentions. Your Majesty, if there's nothing else, I'll take my leave. Su Zimo cupped his fists. The emperor pondered for a moment and said slowly, "The plan of inviting you to be the judge for the weapon refinement segment for the sect competition remains unchanged." That statement meant that the emperor was no longer prejudiced against Su Zimo and tacitly acknowledged all of his achievements. Su Zimo nodded and bade farewell. Looking at Su Zimo's departing back view, the emperor smiled gently and lamented, "Thankfully, Misty Peak has produced someone like him who can win back some points in weapon refinement. Otherwise, Misty Peak would have been utterly humiliated in this sect competition." Pausing for a moment, the emperor shook his head and muttered to himself, "Speaking of which, apart from weapon refinement, Misty Peak is no longer able to fight for the other 3 rankings. Yen, what's going on in Chiyu City? How did Zimo save your life? Tell me." Outside the Rain Admiration Pavilion, Ji Yaoshue asked curiously. Blinking, she looked around and pulled Ji Yaoshue to a corner. Seeing that there was no one around, she whispered, "Sister, I made that up. I don't know any young Master Su at all." Ah. Ji Yaoshue was stunned. She covered her mouth and chuckled. "I only came to help you because I heard that father was enraged." He couldn't tell at all. "You." Ji Yaoshue tapped her fair and delicate forehead and smiled helplessly. "It's not only father. I took it seriously as well." Pausing for a moment, Ji Yaoshue retracted her smile and sighed. "However, if you hadn't appeared, Zimo might have truly been doomed. This Su Zimo is the man of your dreams, sister?" She blinked and asked. Ji Yaoshue blushed and spat softly, "Don't spout nonsense. He must be. Lass, you're asking for a beating." As the two of them bickered, Su Zimo had already walked out of the Rain Admiration Pavilion and was heading over. When he arrived, Su Zimo cupped his fists. "Thank you, princesses. Hey, young Master Su, my name is Ji Yaoyan. Remember that I helped you before. You must thank me if you get the chance." After saying that, she winked at Su Zimo with a bewitching smile while Ji Yaoshue was not paying attention. Her smile was like a flower that could bewitch everyone. Her eyes were like water that could steal souls. Su Zimo closed his eyes hurriedly and gasped for air as he felt a surge of heat in his body. This was the demoness of pure maiden sect. Ji Yaoshue was a little surprised as she glanced at Su Zimo before turning to look at Demoness Ji. At that moment, Demoness Ji had already returned to normal. That bewitching smile and teasing gaze disappeared in a flash, as though it was just an illusion. Demoness Ji waved goodbye. Ji Yaoshue looked at her back view and said to Su Zimo, "You've really got to thank Yen, She doesn't know you at all and made up a lie to deceive father. Yen, is inexperienced and pure. How would she know how to lie? It's really been hard on her this time round." Ji Yaoshue sighed softly once more. Su Zimo was speechless and lamented internally, "If your sister doesn't know how to lie and is pure and kind, then everyone in this world is honest." However, Su Zimo could not say those words out loud. After all, he had promised Demoness Ji to help her hide her identity. Furthermore, given the state of Ji Yaoshue and the emperor, even if Su Zimo told them that their sister and daughter were the demonesses of the fiend sect's pure maiden sect, they would not believe him at all. "What does your sister usually do?" Su Zimo asked in a seemingly casual manner. Ji Yaoshue shook her head. "Yen, can't cultivate and has been learning business from Auntie Gu. Sometimes, she runs around." Su Zimo did not know what sort of cultivation technique she was cultivating that concealed her cultivation realm and made her look like a mortal. However, it was true that she did not have to kill personally for her lineage. It was all about getting someone else to do the dirty work. A single gaze was enough. Chapter 303. The capital of Great Zhou was getting livelier. In the last few days, most of the sects in the territory of Great Zhou had arrived. Under the lead of Array Peak's master, Xian Yi, and Talisman Peak's master, Lu Hui, the group from Misty Peak had also arrived in the capital. Apart from the two perfected Jin Dan, Misty Peak had less than 10 disciples. Look, that seems to be a Misty Peak disciple. To think that they only brought so few people. It's good enough that they're here. I heard that after the battle at Dongling Valley, Misty Peak suffered a huge blow and almost all their Foundation establishment disciples died. Yes, they're probably just here to join in the fun. Misty Peak has almost nothing to do with the competition for the 4 ranking lists. Xian Yi and Lu Hui were expressionless as they walked on the long street and vaguely heard the discussions around them. However, the disciples behind the two of them all revealed indignant expressions. Those people are really spouting nonsense. Senior brother Ji is at 5 Meridian Foundation establishment and will definitely get a spot on the spirit ranking. The person who spoke was round like a ball. It was none other than Misty Peak's little fatty. The senior brother Ji, that little fatty, was referring to, wore a grey robe and had long limbs. His name was Ji Qingtian. Ji Qingtian was one of the 3 legacy disciples of Misty Peak to begin with and was also the only one who survived the battle at Dongling Valley. 3 years ago, Ji Qingtian was only at 4 Meridian Foundation establishment. 3 years later, Ji Qingtian's cultivation realm was already at 5 Meridian Foundation establishment and he was the strongest among the inner sect disciples. When Ji Qingtian heard little fatty's words, he smiled bitterly and his eyes dimmed. Qin Yu, who was initially hailed as the number 1 of the inner sect disciples and had a chance of breaking through to 6 Meridian Foundation establishment before the sect competition, had already died at Dongling Valley. Right now, other than him, the strongest person in Misty Peak was at 3 Meridian Foundation establishment. In fact, there weren't even any disciples at 4 Meridian Foundation establishment in the sect. In other words, other than him, the chances of getting a spot on the spirit ranking were extremely slim for the sect competition this time round. There was still some hope for Misty Peak on the Talisman board. Leng Ro's attainments in talismans were extremely profound, and she had become the strongest person in the Tao of talismans among the inner court disciples. As for alchemy and artifact forging, although the sects had each sent a disciple over, they were only participating for a while. It was impossible for them to leave their names on the pill and artifact rankings. Shui Yi said softly, actually, if junior brother Su was still alive, with his abilities, he would definitely be able to leave his name on the artifact board. Upon hearing the words junior brother Su, everyone from Misty Peak fell silent and sighed. The 2 perfected Jin Dan, Xian Yi, and Lu Hui also shook their heads in pity. Ji Qingtian and the others had mixed feelings about Su Zimo. If not for the fact that Su Zimo had killed the young master of Blood Crow Palace and sacrificed himself to lure away more than half of the cultivators of Blood Crow Palace in the battle 3 years ago, causing the other party to panic, all of them would have died in Dongling Valley. Leng Ro lowered her gaze with a cold expression. However, there was a hint of sorrow in the depths of her eyes. Everyone, get your spirits up. Xian Yi hollered, Shui Yi, the reason why you're here is partly to participate in the sect competition. However, more importantly, you're here to witness the glory of the number 1 weapon refinement master of Great Zhou. That's right. Talisman Peak's master, Lu Hui, nodded. I heard that Mr. Mo will appear in the sect competition as one of the judges for the weapon refinement segment. If you can comprehend a thing or two from Mr. Mo's comments, it will be equivalent to 10 years of hard work. Yes. Shui Yi nodded solemnly. Many weapon refinement masters in the territory of Great Zhou had an almost blind reverence for Mo Ling, and it was the same for Shui Yi. In his opinion, Mo Ling's rise was like a miracle that left one in awe. Throughout history, there had never been a weapon refinement master who could customize supreme-grade spirit weapons like Mo Ling. Every weapon refinement master wanted to witness for themselves what the legendary Mo clan's spirit gathering technique was like. On this day, the morning sun had just risen and the capital was already bustling with activity. There were more than 1,000 sects of various sizes and even more cultivators under them. At a glance, there was a sea of people densely packed, forming waves of people in the long streets and alleys as they surged towards the southwest corner of the capital. Today was the day of the sect competition. Everyone was watching. The location of the sect competition was always at the southwest corner of the capital. There was a huge empty field there that could easily accommodate hundreds of thousands of people. The Scarlet Vulture Guards, Azure Falcon Guards and White Hawk Guards were all mobilized. Each of them rode on spirit beasts and traveled in midair, maintaining the discipline of the streets. Apart from itinerant cultivators, most of the sects were led by perfected Jean Dan. In the middle of the square, there was a square sunken area. The cultivators participating in the sect competition would concoct pills, refine tools, and create talismans in this sunken area to determine the final winner. In the four corners of the sunken area, there were 4 gigantic jade pillars that were as white as ivory and shone with a mysterious luster. The 4 jade pillars represented spirit, talisman, elixir, and weapon respectively. They were the 4 rankings of the sect competition. There were 10 spots on each jade pillar. In other words, after the sect competition ended, 40 names would appear on the 4 jade pillars. They would be the final victors of the sect competition. The sunken area was squarish and had 4 sides. 3 of them were spectator areas for the Foundation establishment cultivators of the various sects to watch the sect competition. The last area was covered with a golden carpet. Walking up the stairs, at the end of the 999 steps, there was a supreme and noble throne. That was the seat of the Emperor of Great Zhou. On both sides of the golden carpet, there were a few rows of chairs and tables that were filled with spirit fruits, immortal peaches, and nectar that emitted a fragrant aroma. Those seats were prepared for the perfected Jean Dan of the various sections. As a perfected Jean Dan, it was impossible for them to squeeze together like Foundation establishment cultivators and watch from the side of the sunken area. Of course, the closer one was to the Emperor of Great Zhou's seat. The more famous and strong a perfected Jean Dan was, the greater the faction backing them. Most of the seats at the end were itinerant cultivators. Although they were also at the Jean Dan realm, they were weak and were purely here to join in the fun and broaden their horizons. The 3 commanders of the capital guards, Bald Vulture, the Bearded Man and Bai Yuhan, guarded the end of the golden carpet. Any perfected Jean Dan that wanted to take a seat would have to go through the 3 of them. The 3 of them weighed the pros and cons before making the appropriate arrangements. When everyone from Misty Peak arrived at the sunken area, Xian Yi turned around and said in a deep voice, "Don't feel pressured for this sect competition. Just do your best." "Yes." Little Fatty and the others replied. Although they agreed readily, every single Misty Peak disciple revealed a hint of nervousness on their faces. The scene this time round was way too grand and cultivators were arriving endlessly. The number of cultivators around the sunken area was increasing. Xian Yi and Lu Hui exchanged glances and could see the helplessness and worry in each other's eyes. The disciples were already showing signs of fear before the battle even started. They were leaderless. The Battle of Dongling Valley had dealt a huge blow to Misty Peak. Although they had a 5-Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator like Ji Qingtian, he lacked decisiveness and dominance. He did not have the confidence of a fearless individual. If he was still alive, perhaps, things would be different. Scenes flashed through Xian Yi's mind. It was a green-robed cultivator with delicate features. Despite his young age, he was calm and composed. Elixir refinement, weapon refinement, 10 formations pagoda challenge, defeated strong foes and was number 1 of the 4 peaks. Chapter 304. The spectator area on both sides of the golden carpet was already filled with perfected beings Jean Dan. Xian Yi and Lu Hui gave a few more instructions before passing through the sunken area and heading towards the spectator area. When they arrived, Xian Yi and Lu Hui passed their sect badges to the Bearded Man and Bai Yuhan respectively. Xian Yi had been to the sect competition more than once and was acquainted with the 3 commanders. However, he still had to do a symbolic check. The bearded man asked with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Wen Xian, you didn't come this time round?" When he heard that, Xian Yi's expression darkened as he shook his head gently. A look of sadness and anger flashed through Lu Hui's eyes as well. The bearded man pondered for a moment and roughly guessed the truth. In the Battle of Dongling Valley, it was said that Misty Peak suffered heavy casualties and a few perfected beings Jin Dan died as well, leaving only one who managed to escape with severe injuries. Judging from Xian Yi and Lu Hui's expressions, Wen Xian was most likely dead. Xian Yi forced a smile. 3 years ago, Misty Peak was ambushed and our sect disciples suffered heavy casualties. We didn't bring many people this time round so that they could broaden their horizons. As for the 4 ranking spots, we don't have any hopes of fighting for them. The bearded man shook his head and said hurriedly, "Fellow Taoist, you're too humble. How can any Misty Peak disciple dare to underestimate you? Even if there's only one of you, you can crush all the paragons." "That's right." Bai Yuhan smiled as well. "Congratulations, Misty Peak is going to be famous once more." "Ah." Xian Yi and Lu Hui were stunned. Both of them thought that the bearded man and Bai Yuhan were being sarcastic and mocking Misty Peak. In previous sect competitions, Misty Peak could take at least 3 of the 10 spots on the spirit ranking alone. At most, they could even take up half of the spirit ranking. But now, there were a total of 40 spots on the 4 ranking lists for this sect competition and Misty Peak could only take up 2 spots at most. It would be a miracle if they did not embarrass the sect, let alone become famous. Lu Hui harumphed coldly with a displeased expression. Xian Yi frowned in confusion. The way he looked at the bearded man and Bai Yuhan did not look like he was mocking them. Just now, his tone sounded sincere, as though he was referring to something else. "The 2 of you, please come in." The curly-bearded man nodded with a smile and added. There were other Jin Dan perfected persons queuing up behind the 2 of them. Xian Yi did not want to stay here any longer. He could only sit in the spectator seats with a hint of doubt. "Look, the first seat has already gone over." Next to the sunken area, Little Fatty pointed to the distant spectator seats and said, "The seats of the 2 chiefs are quite good. They are very close to the throne." The spectator stands could be divided into several areas. There was only 1 seat in the first area, and that was the Emperor's throne. Below the Son of Heaven's throne, there weren't many seats in the second region. Right now, they were all empty, and no one was seated. The third area was occupied by Xian Yi, Lu Hui, and the others. Apart from the 2 of them, the perfected Jin Dan of Iridescent Clouds Palace, True Fire Sect, Southern Mountains Sect and Azure Frost Sect were already seated. Next was the 4th area, where the perfected Jin Dan of the other sects of the Great Zhou dynasty were seated. It had the most seats and the largest area. The 5th area was for the itinerant cultivators of Jin Dan realm. How ignorant! Even if perfected Jin Dan of Misty Peak is seated in the 3rd area, what can that prove? Right then, a cold sneer sounded from the side, filled with mockery. Another sarcastic voice sounded. "In my opinion, Misty Peak is going to be removed from the 5 major sects after this sect competition." Little Fatty and the others frowned and looked over. The 2 people who spoke were disciples of True Fire Sect standing at the side. As one of the 5 major sects, True Fire Sect had more than 100 foundation establishment cultivators. Of the 2 people in the lead, one of them was a man with a chiseled face, a high nose bridge and thin lips. He exuded a cold and ruthless aura. The other person wore a red robe and had a haughty expression. True Fire Sect doesn't have the final say on whether or not we're going to be removed. "Take care of yourselves," Shui Yi retorted angrily. The man in the red robe turned around and scanned Shui Yi, asking with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, you seem indignant. You're only at mid-stage foundation establishment. You must be here to fight for one of the 3 rankings, talisman, elixir, or weapon. The elixir and weapon refinement masters of Misty Peak." "Ha, I won't comment on them. Upon hearing that, the crowd burst into laughter. In the previous sect competitions, none of the Misty Peak disciples could leave their names on the elixir and weapon rankings. The elixir and weapon refinement masters of Misty Peak were a joke in the eyes of everyone. When they heard the mocking laughter, everyone from Misty Peak had terrible expressions. The man in the red robe smiled and continued asking, "In that case, you're a talisman master?" "No." Shui shouted, "I'm not afraid to let you guys know that I'm a weapon refinement master and I'm here for the weapon refinement segment." "Oh," the man in the red robe dragged out with a look of realization and said with a fake smile, "So, you're a weapon refinement master, and one from Misty Peak at that. Sorry for the disrespect." Everyone present could hear the mockery in the man's tone. The man in the red robe continued, "What a coincidence. I'm Tao Feng and I'm a weapon refinement master as well." "So, he's Tao Feng." "Who's Tao Feng?" "The #1 weapon refinement master of True Fire sect. He's only 30 years old and has successfully refined a superior grade spirit weapon. He's already an advanced weapon refinement master. It's rumored that fellow Daoist Tao Feng is the #1 weapon refinement master of the younger generation." When he heard the discussions in the crowd and sensed the envious gazes of the cultivators nearby, Tao Feng smiled and raised his chin slightly, looking at Shui smugly with a provocative gaze. "Fellow Daoist, how should I address you? I wonder what grade spirit weapon you can refine." Shui blushed and did not say anything. Given his capabilities, he could only refine inferior grade spirit weapons and could not even refine middle grade spirit weapons. Naturally, he was far from being comparable to Tao Feng. Raising his brow, Tao Feng sneered, "So, you're a nobody. You." Shui glared at him. "What's there to be proud of?" Little Fatty pouted his lips. The #1 weapon refinement master of Great Zhou, Mr. Mo, is so incredible and his achievements are 1,000 times greater than yours. If you're really capable, go and compete with him." Tao Feng declared proudly. "Rumor has it that Mr. Mo is a perfected Jin Dan and must have lived for a few hundred years. I dare say that Mr. Mo definitely won't be able to reach my achievements at my age." None of the cultivators present had the right to refute. Furthermore, Tao Feng looked at Shui and sneered, "You think you're worthy of being called a weapon refinement master? Let me give you a piece of advice. Don't come out and embarrass yourself in the future. Hurry and scram back to your place. F***CK. Little Fatty's blood boiled and he was about to curse. "Junior brother." At the side, Ji Qingtian frowned and held back Little Fatty who was enraged, shaking his head. "Forget it, let's not argue with them. Let's sigh." When they heard Ji Qingtian's sigh, everyone from Misty Peak went silent and felt a sense of helplessness. No matter what, the current Misty Peak was indeed inferior to others. When he saw that, Tao Feng was even more smug and roared in laughter. Misty Peak has no one to refine weapons and yet any Tom, Dick or Harry dares to claim to be a weapon refinement master? What a joke, ha! Who said that Misty Peak has no one to refine weapons? Right at this moment, another voice resounded from the crowd, and it faintly revealed a trace of golden killing intent. Chapter 305. Many cultivators turned towards the source of the voice with curious expressions. When they heard that voice, Little Fatty, Leng Ro and Shui were stunned for a moment as confusion flashed through their eyes. After a brief pause, Little Fatty's eyes widened as he exclaimed softly, "It's Big Bro." Leng Ro's expression changed and her eyes rippled. There was only one person that Little Fatty was referring to, Su Zimo. Naturally, Leng Ro could tell that the person's voice was extremely similar to Su Zimo's. However, that was impossible. Su Zimo was clearly already, with a hint of anticipation and trepidation, everyone from Misty Peak turned around. Not far away, a green-robed cultivator walked over from the crowd with the Misty Peak sect badge on his waist. He had delicate features and exuded a scholarly aura, resembling a frail scholar. However, as the green-robed cultivator walked through the crowd, the surrounding cultivators subconsciously made way for him. It was as though there was an invisible aura around the green-robed cultivator. It was only after he walked over that everyone reacted with confused expressions, not knowing why they had moved aside just now. Ah! At that moment, even with Leng Ro's indifferent nature, her expression changed starkly as she exclaimed and covered her mouth hurriedly. Ji Qingtian was stunned and his eyes were filled with disbelief. Junior brother Su, why you're still alive? Shui Yi's voice was trembling with an agitated expression. Little Fatty squeezed through the crowd and arrived before Su Zimo in the blink of an eye. He thumped Su Zimo's chest repeatedly and grinned foolishly. It's true, it's true. Ha! Ha 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 ha. Smiling gently, Su Zimo swept his gaze across Leng Ro, Shui Yi, and Ji Qingtian before nodding. Even though he had heard about the outcome of the battle at Dongling Valley, Su Zimo only felt a hint of sorrow when he saw that there were only a few people from his sect. This was not supposed to be the case. Initially, there should have been 100 top foundation establishment cultivators from Misty Peak with a huge commotion. Initially, even disciples of True Fire's sect would not dare to speak rudely to Misty Peak disciples. But now, everyone from Misty Peak could only lower their heads helplessly in the face of the bullying and mockery of True Fire sect disciples. Su Zimo's anger, but his expression turned colder. Bro, where have you been for the past 3 years? Why haven't you heard? How did you survive back then? Little Fatty had countless questions in his mind, waiting for Zimo's answer. It's a long story. I'll tell you in the future if I have the chance. Su Zimo swept his gaze across the disciples of True Fire's sect and asked coldly, who said that Misty Peak has no talent in weapon refinement? I said so. Tao Feng sized up Su Zimo and cracked his neck, scoffing, why? You're indignant. You even said that the weapon refinement masters of Misty Peak are a joke. Su Zimo did not reply and continued asking. That's right, I said so. Tao Feng laughed. Also, I'm telling you, that's the truth. If you're indignant, that's easy too. Let's go down and compete. Junior brother Su, compete with him. We believe in you. Shui Yi clenched his fists. Even though they had not seen each other for 3 years, Shui Yi knew that Su Zimo's weapon refinement skills were definitely better than his and might even be able to refine middle-grade spirit weapons by now. Do you dare to compete, Tao Feng looked at Su Zimo provocatively. Su Zimo did not even look at him and merely replied indifferently, you're not qualified to compete with me. The moment he said that, the crowd went silent. In the blink of an eye, it became even noisier. Ha, that lad is really funny. He's the first person who dares to say that Tao Feng is not qualified. Who is that person? He really doesn't know his place. That person must be ignorant. He doesn't even know who Tao Feng is and yet he dares to spout such nonsense. He's truly an embarrassment to Misty Peak. A series of mocking laughter sounded from the crowd as many cultivators pointed at Su Zimo and gossiped. Tao Feng was extremely pleased as he looked at Su Zimo with a smile, as though he was watching a joke. Su Zimo. Right then, a woman's voice sounded from the other side of the crowd with a hint of doubt. Turning around, Su Zimo met that person's gaze. After a slight pause, they looked away and returned to normal. Shin Meng Qi. The crowd over there were disciples of Iridescent Cloud's palace and Shin Meng Qi was among them. Ever since they parted ways in the capital of Yan country, Su Zimo no longer felt any emotions when he saw Shin Meng Qi again. Shin Meng Qi came to Su Zimo's side and frowned. It's really you. After 3 years, you're still as arrogant as ever. Do you know who he is? Shin Meng Qi pointed at Tao Feng and questioned Su Zimo. Su Zimo shook his head. I don't know. With a reprimanding tone, Shin Meng Qi said in a deep voice, he's Tao Feng, a weapon refinement master of True Fire sect. True Fire sect is known for their ability to control flames, and they can take at least 3 spots on the elixir and weapon rankings each time. However, Misty Peak can't even get a single spot. What do you have to compete with him in weapon refinement? I don't want to compete with him. I've already said that he's not qualified. Su Zimo's tone was still calm and natural, as though he was stating a fact. However, Su Zimo's words attracted even more mocking laughter. Shen Mengqi was so angry that she laughed instead. Fellow Daoist Tao Feng is known as the #1 weapon refinement master of the younger generation. If you say that he's not qualified, it will only show your ignorance and arrogance. That's right, I'm indeed ignorant, Su Zimo nodded with a look of mockery in his eyes. I believe in junior brother Su. Right then, Leng Ro suddenly spoke. Although her voice was cold, it was extremely firm. If he says that Tao Feng is not qualified, then Tao Feng is definitely not qualified. When he heard that, Su Zimo smiled at Leng Ro and nodded. When she saw that, Shen Mengqi felt vexed for no reason. Fellow Daoist, I can understand that you want to support your fellow sect mates. However, don't be too blind or you'll only bring shame to Misty Peak. Shen Mengqi looked at Leng Ro and sneered, let me tell you, in the capital of Great Zhou, there's only one person who has the right to say that Tao Feng is not qualified. That person is the #1 weapon refinement master of Great Zhou, Mr. Mo Ling. When they heard the words Mr. Mo, the crowd quietened down. This name did indeed have a strange magical power. Tao Feng nodded as well. If Mr. Mo is here, I'm willing to listen to his teachings. Pausing for a moment, Tao Feng glanced sideways at Su Zimo and changed the topic. However, who do you think you are? Shen Mengqi saw that Su Zimo was completely unmoved by the words Mr. Mo. His expression was calm and his eyes were calm. She could not help but shake her head and sigh softly. It seems like you haven't even heard of Mr. Mo's name. There was a sense of superiority in that sigh, as though it was an honor to have heard of Mr. Mo's name that was worth bragging about. Chapter 306. Su Zimo turned around and asked with a fake smile, are you close to Mr. Mo? Chen Mengqi was stumped by the question and looked flustered. As a foundation establishment cultivator, how would she have the chance to know Mr. Mo? Su Zimo smiled. Seems like you're not close to Mr. Mo at all. Does that mean that you've met him before? Su Zimo's gaze seemed to have a deeper meaning. That feeling made Chen Mengqi feel inexplicably frustrated. Chen Mengqi composed herself and raised her chin. A look of pride flashed through her eyes as she said, I've never met Mr. Mo before. However, I've attended the auction that he organized. Without experiencing it personally, you'll never be able to imagine how powerful a weapon refinement master is. Su Zimo did not say anything and merely looked at Chen Mengqi calmly with a faint smile on his lips. You don't have to look at me like that. Chen Mengqi harumphed. What kind of person is Mr. Mo? It's normal that I haven't met him before. Even the thousands of perfected Jin Dan cultivators at the spectator area have not seen Mr. Mo's true appearance before, let alone me. Su Zimo smiled and looked at Chen Mengqi quietly, asking, what are you trying to say? I just want to tell you that even though you're here for the sect competition, it doesn't prove anything. Chen Mengqi clenched her fists. You're still as arrogant, conceited, and ignorant as ever. You haven't even heard of Mr. Mo's name. I advise you not to join the competition lest you embarrass yourself. There was something else that Chen Mengqi did not say. Even though Su Zimo had started cultivating and was here for the sect competition, he would never be able to beat her. Chen Mengqi only wanted to prove one thing. Something that she could not let go of all these years. That year, that day in that small town, her choice was not wrong. Your master is here too, right? Su Zimo suddenly asked. What are you doing? Instantly, Chen Mengqi turned nervous and frowned. Su Zimo, I advise you to calm down and not send yourself to your death. Master is really angry about what happened 3 years ago. 3 years ago, in the capital of Yan country, Su Zimo killed a disciple of Iridescent Cloud's palace and severely injured a group of Iridescent Cloud's palace cultivators. Naturally, this matter could not be hidden from perfected being Sung Lang. Su Zimo smiled and said slowly, I heard that your master, perfected being Sung Lang, has a good relationship with Mr. Mo. Mr. Mo is willing to customize a supreme-grade spirit weapon for him on a single condition. Chen Mengqi's expression changed. This was definitely a humiliation for perfected being Sung Lang. In less than a day, the news had already spread through the entire capital. In Iridescent Cloud's palace, no one dared to discuss this matter at all. Su Zimo's gaze was deep as he said meaningfully, Chen Mengqi, have you ever wondered why Mr. Mo would propose such a condition? Almost everyone knew that the condition was for perfected being Sung Lang to kneel. In an instant, Chen Mengqi seemed to have thought of something. Just as she was about to think about it carefully, a voice suddenly called out to her, interrupting her train of thought. Junior sister, he's Su Zimo. A man dressed in the Daoist robes of Iridescent Cloud's palace strode over. He was extraordinarily handsome and his footsteps were elegant as he glared at Su Zimo with a hint of killing intent. Ah, he's... Chen Mengqi replied instinctively. She had already vaguely thought of an answer to Su Zimo's question just now. However, she was interrupted by her senior brother, Si Yutong, and could not recall it no matter how hard she tried. You're the one who killed a disciple of Iridescent Cloud's palace, Si Yutong came before Su Zimo and asked coldly with an unfriendly expression. It's me. Su Zimo's tone was indifferent. That lad is truly audacious to have killed a cultivator of Iridescent Cloud's palace. Misty Peak was already weak this time round. To think that such a disciple would appear and make so many enemies, offending True Fire Sect and Iridescent Cloud's palace in one go. I think Misty Peak is doomed this time round. The nearby cultivators discussed fervently and watched the commotion from the side. Chen Mengqi frowned and persuaded softly, Senior brother, forget it. This is the capital of Great Zhou. Forget it, Fufu. Si Yutong was unmoved and sneered, Su Zimo, do you dare to participate in the fight for the spirit ranking? Before Su Zimo could say anything, a sudden exclamation from the crowd attracted everyone's attention. Look, over there. To think that they can fly in the capital. Who are they? By the looks of it, they should be a few princes. Not far away in the skies, a total of 5 men flew over under the escort of a group of powerful Jin Dan Imperial Guards. They were dressed luxuriously and had a graceful bearing as they descended slowly to the spectator area. The 5 of them arrived below the Emperor's throne and took their seats in the second area, nodding to their surroundings. Before long, a commotion broke out from the crowd once more. Not far away in the sky, 2 women were walking on air as they flew over. The woman at the front was extremely beautiful and had a smile on her face. She had a voluptuous figure and exuded a mature and seductive charm. The other girl wore a pink dress and had a petite figure with curves. Unfortunately, her face was covered by a veil and her appearance could not be seen clearly. Si Yutong coughed gently and said proudly, if I'm not wrong, the person in front should be Chief Steward Gu of Sky Treasure Auction House. Chief Steward Gu is truly a beauty of a generation. Another cultivator had an infatuated expression as he gulped. Who's that girl behind her? Although she's covered by a veil, her eyes are truly beautiful as though they can speak. Just as everyone was discussing, the girl in pink in midair suddenly turned around and looked over. Her large, watery eyes blinked before curling into a pair of crescent moons with a bright smile. Look, that girl in pink is looking at me. Don't spout nonsense. She must be looking at me. The cultivators nearby started arguing. Tao Feng of True Fire Sect sneered internally but pretended to be calm as he nodded to the girl in pink. It was the same for Si Yutong. Thinking that the girl in pink had noticed him, he nodded hurriedly in acknowledgement. When Su Zimo saw that, he sighed internally. Demoness Ji's methods were truly formidable. If she were to grow up in the future, she would definitely be someone who could topple the world. Right in front of everyone, Gu Shi and Demoness Ji descended slowly and sat down in the second area of the spectator area with the prince. Initially, many cultivators did not know who was seated in the second area. Now that they saw it, they were enlightened. Those seated in the second area were either members of the royal family or the most powerful cultivators in the capital. There were not many seats in the second area. By the time Gu Shi and Demoness Ji sat down, there were only 2 seats left. Look! Someone in the crowd pointed into the distance and exclaimed. In the distant skies, a group of palace maids flew over. Dressed in gauze with ribbons around their necks, all of them were extremely beautiful. Many palace maids were standing on auspicious clouds, escorting a graceful and luxurious carriage as it slowly approached. Inside the carriage sat a slender and exquisite figure. Under the cover of the bead curtain, it was faintly discernible, and her appearance could not be seen clearly. There were more than 100,000 cultivators around the sunken area. At that moment, their mouths were agape with shocked expressions. Chapter 307. She must be the third princess of Great Zhou. I heard that the third princess used the alias Yaoxue to cultivate in Azure Frost sect. Now that she has regained her identity, I'm sure she won't return to Azure Frost sect. I heard that the third princess is beautiful and devastatingly beautiful. It would be great if I could take a closer look. Discussions broke out in the crowd. Tao Feng pondered for a moment and his eyes lit up in realization. So, it's fellow Taoist Yaoxue. In that case, I've met the third princess once before. Senior brother Tao, you're amazing. Senior brother Tao, is the third princess as beautiful as the rumors say? Beside Tao Feng, many true fire sect disciples revealed envious expressions and fought to ask questions. Tao Feng was delighted. On the other side, Si Yutang smiled leisurely. Back then, I had the honor of chatting with fellow Taoist Yaoxue. At that time, I already felt that she had an extraordinary aura. It's no wonder then that she has such a background. Si Yutang's words were extremely particular. On the one hand, he was flaunting that he had chatted with the third princess of Great Zhou. On the other hand, he was praising himself for having good taste. The moment Si Yutang said that, it naturally attracted the flattery of a group of cultivators as well. Next to Iridescent Cloud's palace, Misty Peak and True Fire sect were the 100 Foundation establishment disciples of Azure Frost sect. When they heard the discussions from Tao Feng and Si Yutang's side, many Azure Frost sect disciples sneered. One of them said, our senior brother Jun and senior sister Yaoxue are close friends and did not say anything. Yet, you guys think that it's worth bragging about having met and exchanged a single sentence? What a joke. That's right. Only senior brother Jun is worthy of senior sister Yaoxue. The senior brother Jun that the Azure Frost sect disciples were talking about was Jun Hao, the #1 foundation establishment cultivator of Azure Frost sect. He had pursued Yaoxue bitterly for many years, but the latter's attitude towards him was neither warm nor cold. At that moment, Jun Hao stood at the front of the many Azure Frost sect disciples with his hands behind his back. He had an imposing aura and merely smiled indifferently without saying anything. As everyone was discussing, the carriage that was flying towards the spectator area suddenly stopped and changed directions, heading over slowly. Could it be that the third princess is coming over? Tao Feng suddenly straightened his clothes, feeling a little nervous. Si Yutang's heart suddenly started pounding, and he felt his mouth go dry. The same thought flashed through their minds at the same time. Could it be that the third princess is here to see me? The carriage in the air was clearly descending in front of them. Senior sister Yaoxue is here. Senior brother June, the third princess must be here for you. A few Azure Frost sect disciples said excitedly. June Hao of the Azure Frost sect smiled and looked at the people in the carriage with a gentle gaze. Crash! An arm as white as a lotus root stretched out and lifted the bead curtain, revealing an elegant, beautiful, and flawless face. Everyone held their breaths. Ji Yaoshue was wearing a light yellow robe. The material of the robe was unique and intricate patterns were engraved on it. It was as if it was made by the heavens and was extremely beautiful. So beautiful! A series of exclamations could be heard from the crowd. In reality, Ji Yaoshue's appearance could not be considered as peerless, nor could she compare to Daiyu. She was only comparable to Leng Ro, and each had their own merits. However, she was the princess of Great Zhou after all. The light yellow robe on her today was different as well and matched her perfectly. It accentuated her slender figure and added a sense of nobility and elegance. A weapon refinement master's eyes flickered as he said in a deep voice, "That robe is not simple. It seems to be an extremely high-grade defensive spirit weapon. As expected of the princess of the Great Zhou dynasty. Even a casual robe is a high-grade defensive spirit weapon. By the looks of it, it seems like it was tailor-made for her." Many cultivators revealed envious gazes. Some of the female cultivators were even jealous, imagining how they would look like wearing the light yellow robe. With light steps, Ji Yaoshue walked towards the crowd. Instinctively, the crowd parted and made way for her. June Hao of Azure Frost sect cupped his fists and said sincerely with a smile, "Junior sister Yaoshue, it's only been a few days since we last met." "You're really getting prettier," June Hao could not continue. Initially, he thought that Ji Yaoshue was here for him. However, earlier on, Ji Yaoshue merely glanced at him casually and nodded as a form of greeting. Ji Yaoshue brushed past him without saying anything. In fact, she did not even stop in her tracks. A fragrant wind blew past, leaving June Hao's hands hanging in midair with a slightly stiff expression. Tao Feng was delighted when he saw that. Although he was looking forward to it, Tao Feng did not have much hope. After all, he had only met Ji Yaoshue once. But now, Ji Yaoshue was completely ignoring June Hao of Azure Frost sect and was walking towards him. When he saw Ji Yaoshue approaching, Tao Feng coughed gently and revealed a radiant smile. "I'm Tao Feng." "Greetings, third," Tao Feng could not continue. Ji Yaoshue glanced at him and walked past him without even nodding. That gaze was as though she was looking at a stranger. Little Fatty finally got the chance and could not help but laugh. "Oh, the princess doesn't even know you. You've only met her once?" Tao Feng harumphed with a dark expression. When he saw the third princess of Great Zhou walking towards him, Si Yutang took a deep breath and composed himself. Taking a few steps forward, he bowed slightly and cupped his fists. Ji Yaoshue did not even look at him and walked past Si Yutang. With an awkward expression, Si Yutang's face flushed red and he wanted nothing more than to find a hole to hide in. "Who is the third princess looking for?" "I don't know." As Ji Yaoshue walked over, the crowd parted to the sides. Only one person did not move and was extremely eye-catching. "Su Zimo, what are you standing there for? Aren't you going to move aside?" Chen Mengqi frowned and hollered. Su Zimo did not say anything. Chen Mengqi sneered, "Su Zimo, you've offended True Fire Sect and Iridescent Cloud's palace. In the capital, perhaps no one can do anything to you. However, if you offend the third princess of Great Zhou, no one can save you." Su Zimo remained silent. "Why are you still as stubborn as when you were young? You won't kneel when I ask you to and move aside when I ask you to." Chen Mengqi gritted her teeth and walked towards Su Zimo, wanting to push him away. Right then, Ji Yaoshue had already arrived before Su Zimo and stopped in her tracks. Chen Mengqi also stopped in her tracks instinctively. The initially noisy crowd suddenly quietened down. Everyone's gazes were on Ji Yaoshue. However, Ji Yaoshue's gaze was on Su Zimo's face. The two of them exchanged glances. Ji Yaoshue turned around gently and her pale yellow robes fluttered slightly, resembling the rippling heart of a young girl in love. Ji Yaoshue blinked her bright eyes and asked with a smile, "Zimo, how is it?" Everyone was dumbfounded. Their jaws almost dropped to the ground. Chen Mengqi's mind was in a mess. Zimo? The third princess was calling him Zimo. Why was she calling him so intimately? What rights did she have? Ji Yaoshue's question came out of nowhere and no one understood what she was asking. However, she knew that Su Zimo would definitely be able to understand it. That was because the person before her was the one who gave her that pale yellow robe personally. Su Zimo nodded. Very beautiful. The next moment, she smiled like a flower. Chapter 308. In a woman's heart, no matter how many praises others gave her, they could not compare to those two words from his mouth. The woman's smile stunned everyone present and made their hearts skip a beat. Many cultivators were petrified on the spot and could not recover for a long time. No matter how they listened, their conversation did not sound right. What were the two of them doing in front of everyone? Initially, many cultivators still harbored some fantasies about the third princess of Great Zhou. But now, they felt a sharp pain in their chests, as though they had suffered a heavy blow. Shui Yi said in disbelief, "This junior brother Su knows the third princess." Hee hee. Little Fatty pinched his chubby chin and his eyes burned with the flames of gossip as he smiled lasciviously. By the looks of it, their relationship isn't simple. Tao Feng's expression darkened as he glared at Su Zimo with obvious hostility. Just now, Si Yutong had already returned to the crowd after being humiliated. He snorted with a dark expression. What's going on? He's not here for senior brother Jun. Who is that? Why is he so familiar with senior sister Yaoshue? Many Azure Frost sect disciples frowned and discussed softly. Taking a deep breath of air, Junhao lowered his head and clenched his fists behind his back. Green veins popped out on his fists before disappearing after a while. Ji Yaoshue was delighted to receive Su Zimo's acknowledgement and said softly, "Wait here for a while. The sect competition is about to begin." "Yes." Su Zimo nodded. "I'll head over first then." Ji Yaoshue smiled and waved to Su Zimo before turning to leave in front of everyone. Just now, her actions were rather bold and she mustered her courage. Even now, her heart was still thumping wildly when she thought about it. Coupled with the fiery gazes from all around, she could not help but feel shy despite being a princess and was too embarrassed to continue staying. Junhao noticed the shyness and gentleness that Ji Yaoshue inadvertently revealed. He couldn't help but frown as a trace of imperceptible gloominess flashed through the depths of his eyes. Then, Junhao's expression changed. His eyes flickered and he seemed to be deep in thought. No. Just now, Ji Yaoshue had said something wrong. The intersect tournament was about to begin. Ji Yaoshue asked Su Zimo to wait here for a while. After a while, what was she going to do? Or, what was this Su Zimo trying to do? Just to participate in the sect tournament? Then I'll head over first. This was Ji Yaoshue's second sentence. At first, it didn't sound like much. However, after careful consideration, it became even more problematic. As the princess of Great Zhou, Ji Yaoshue was going to the second spectator area. Why would she tell Su Zimo that she would head over first? Ji Yaoshue wouldn't have said that unless Su Zimo was going to head over as well. However, was that possible? Who were the people seated in the second spectator area? What right did a foundation establishment cultivator like him have to do that? Junhao looked around without batting an eyelid. Many cultivators were excited and discussed fervently. Most of their discussions were about the third princess's peerless beauty and her relationship with Su Zimo. There was also a group of people who were immersed in the scene just now and could not extricate themselves from it. Other than him, no one else noticed the abnormality in Ji Yaoshua's words. Perhaps I'm thinking too much. Jun Hao lamented internally. I've got it. Right then, a cultivator in the crowd suddenly said, as though he had discovered a huge secret. What? Another person asked. That person said slowly, did you guys notice? After the third princess sat down, there was only a single seat left in the second spectator area. That's right, so what? That person smiled smugly. I'm willing to bet that that seat is definitely reserved for Mr. Mo. Many cultivators pondered for a moment before realization dawned on them. That's right, it must be Mr. Mo. Yes, only Mr. Mo has that right. That seat is on par with the princes and princesses and can be said to be second only to one. Indeed, Mr. Mo is the only one who can suppress all the perfected Jin Dan cultivators. When he heard the discussions around him, Jun Hao's heart lightened as he heaved a long sigh of relief and laughed involuntarily. Since that seat is reserved for Mr. Mo, it has nothing to do with Su Zimo. In that case, I'm indeed thinking too much. In reality, a few elders of True Fire sect in the spectator area had seen Mr. Mo's appearance in the palace before. However, there was still a huge distance between the spectator area and the sunken area. Coupled with the fact that there were 100,000 Foundation establishment cultivators, their attention was not on that area at all. At the spectator area, most of the perfected Jin Dan cultivators were drinking and chatting merrily. Although the sect competition was a fight for Foundation establishment cultivators, for many perfected Jin Dan cultivators, it was also a great opportunity to network and rope in factions. Senior brother, what are you thinking about? Lu Hui could not help but ask softly when she saw Xian Yi's melancholic expression as he looked at the 100,000 Foundation establishment cultivators in a daze. Xian Yi retracted his gaze and shook his head. Nothing. Just now, there was a commotion in the crowd. In his daze, he seemed to have caught sight of a familiar green robe. However, it was drowned in the crowd in the blink of an eye. Xian Yi sighed gently, thinking that he was hallucinating due to his mental fatigue. Fellow Taoist Xian Yi. Right then, a greeting sounded from the side. Xian Yi turned and saw that it was perfected being Tsang Lang of Iridescent Cloud's palace. Perfected being Tsang Lang raised his wine glass and asked with a smile, I heard that there's an inner sect disciple in Misty Peak named Su Zimo. I wonder who he's under. Xian Yi frowned. Why do you ask, fellow Taoist Tsang Lang? Fu, it's nothing. Perfected being Tsang Lang chuckled. I have some grudges with that lad and would like to ask for him from Misty Peak. I wonder if you can give me some face. No. Xian Yi didn't even think about it and flatly refused. Perfected being Tsang Lang narrowed his eyes slightly and his expression darkened as he said slowly, that man killed 2 of my disciples. How should we settle the score? So what if they died because they were inferior? Aren't you embarrassed that a perfected Jin Dan cultivator like you is seeking revenge? Xian Yi sneered. Perfected being Tsang Lang said coolly, Xian Yi, let me give you a piece of advice. Don't ruin the relationship between Iridescent Cloud's palace and Misty Peak just because of a Foundation establishment cultivator. Can you represent Iridescent Cloud's palace, perfected being Tsang Lang? It was just a few sentences and the 2 of them were already at odds with each other. Right then, someone at the side laughed sinisterly. Brother Tsang Lang, there's no need to argue with him. Misty Peak is already on the decline and he's still so stubborn. He's just asking for trouble. Sima Ji, what are you trying to do? Xian Yi's expression changed slightly. Perfected being Tsang Lang smiled. Brother Sima, what can I do for you? Sima Ji of True Fire sect said leisurely, Misty Peak only brought a few people this time round. As long as our sects join forces during the fight for the spirit ranking, it won't matter even if Misty Peak has a 5 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator. Alright, we'll let Misty Peak return empty-handed this time round without a single spot. A mocking look flashed through perfected being Tsung Lang's eyes as he laughed. One of the 5 major sects. Fufu, Misty Peak is done for. Chapter 309. Despicable. Xian Yi clenched his fists and cursed through gritted teeth. To begin with, Misty Peak was already weak in this sect competition with only a 5 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator. If they were targeted as well, they would truly have no chance at all. Roar. Right then, a deafening roar sounded from the distant horizon, shaking the voids in an incomparably dignified manner. Everyone's hearts skipped a beat as they turned towards the sound. 5 tall and ferocious-looking lions galloped over in a menacing manner. Their fur was golden without any impurities, as though they were burning with golden flames. It's a golden lion. That's an ancient remnant beast. Furthermore, it's a golden lion of the Jin Dan realm. The 5 golden lions were tied with metal reins and pulled an ancient war chariot behind them. A middle-aged man in golden robes stood on the war chariot. His eyes were like lightning and he exuded a domineering aura that could sweep through the world. The person on the war chariot was the Emperor of Great Zhou. Greetings, Your Majesty. All the Imperial Army guards present knelt on one knee and hollered in unison with a frightening aura. Perfected Jin Dan, who was at the spectator area, stood up hurriedly and cupped their fists, nodding in acknowledgement. Soldiers, rise. Everyone, please take a seat. The Emperor's tone was calm as he leaped down from the war chariot and sat down at the highest position of the spectator area. We've finally met the Emperor of Great Zhou. We didn't waste our time coming to this sect competition. What an imposing aura. Just now, I'm almost kneeling as well. Many Foundation establishment cultivators around the 4 jade pillars were impressed by the Emperor's demeanor and discussed softly with excited expressions. Su Zimo had an indifferent expression and his eyes were calm as water, as though the Emperor's arrival did not affect him at all. Sweeping her gaze, Chen Mengqi asked in a seemingly casual manner, Su Zimo, how did you get to know the Princess of Great Zhou? What has it got to do with you? Su Zimo did not even look at Chen Mengqi as he asked instead. Chen Mengqi harumphed and said, Su Zimo, don't be smug. It's no big deal to know the Princess of Great Zhou. Furthermore, let me remind you that you've already made enemies with Iridescent Cloud's Palace and True Fire's sect. Because of the Princess of Great Zhou, I saw that the disciples of Azure Frost's sect were also hostile towards you. Shen Mengqi sneered, the actions of the Princess of Great Zhou have unknowingly created many strong enemies for you. Let's see how you're going to deal with this later. Su Zimo smiled faintly. On the spectator stand. The Emperor pressed his hands down and the crowd gradually quietened down. The Emperor said in a deep voice, the sect competition will begin soon. Before that, I'd like to introduce a weapon refinement master. I'm sure everyone has heard of him. The #1 weapon refiner of the Great Zhou dynasty. Mr. Mo Ling. Of course we know. On the spectator stand, many Jin Dan perfected persons smiled and nodded with anticipation in their eyes. The Emperor continued, although you guys have heard of his name, I'm sure not many of you have seen his true appearance. That's right. Perfected being Yi Ning smiled bitterly. I wanted to thank Mr. Mo personally the previous time but unfortunately, I didn't get to see him either. Perfected being Yun Shan of Southern Mountains sect nodded as well. That's right. Mr. Mo is way too mysterious. The Emperor smiled gently. This time round, I've invited Mr. Mo to be a judge for the weapon refinement segment of the sect competition. Everyone, you'll be able to see him soon. Many perfected being Jin Dan were invigorated. Which perfected being Jean Dan would not want to befriend a weapon refinement master that could customize supreme-grade spirit weapons? Perfected being Sung Lang narrowed his eyes and scanned the surroundings as well. He wanted to see who this Mr. Mo was and what grudges he had with him for him to humiliate him in public. Many Foundation establishment cultivators around the 4 jade pillars widened their eyes and looked into the distant skies repeatedly, wanting to catch sight of the legendary Mr. Mo immediately. How do you guys think Mr. Mo will appear? Don't worry, it won't be any weaker than the princes and princesses. Given Mr. Mo's strength and status, I believe that he'll even come riding on a pure-blooded ferocious beast. Everyone was curious as they discussed excitedly. Little Fatty turned around as well and asked excitedly, "Bro, how old do you think Mr. Mo is and what he looks like?" Su Zimo replied, "In his 20s, I guess." Ha ha ha. The moment Su Zimo spoke, a burst of laughter sounded from the surroundings. Many people looked at Su Zimo as though they were looking at an idiot. Tao Feng's eyes were filled with mockery as he chuckled. A weapon refinement master of Misty Peak is truly a joke, Fufu. Shen Mengqi frowned. Su Zimo, if you don't know, just say so. No one will blame you. You'll only attract the ridicule of others and expose your ignorance by spouting nonsense like that. Oh. Su Zimo raised his brow slightly. Shen Mengqi said in a deep voice, "Mr. Mo can customize supreme-grade spirit weapons. Do you think that's something a person in his 20s can do? Even if I don't know how to refine weapons, I can understand that logic." Right then, the Emperor's voice sounded once more. "Actually, Mr. Mo has arrived a long time ago. He's right in the middle of everyone." "Ah. Mr. Mo is already here. Where is he?" At the spectator area, all the perfected Jean Dan cultivators turned to look beside them instinctively, only to realize that the other party was looking over in confusion as well. The Emperor raised his voice. "Mr. Mo, please head to the spectator area." The moment he said that, the thousands of perfected Jean Dan cultivators and the 100,000-odd Foundation establishment cultivators went silent. Everyone held their breaths and scanned their surroundings continuously. Everyone from Misty Peak, Tao Feng, Jun Hao, Si Yutang, Shen Mengqi and the others were searching instinctively as well. All of a sudden, a figure moved and walked past everyone, attracting everyone's gazes. "Su Zimo, what are you doing?" Shen Mengqi frowned and shouted. Su Zimo was unmoved. Tao Feng sneered, "You really don't know what's good for you. How dare you act so brazenly in front of the Emperor? He's calling for Mr. Mo, not you." Shen Mengqi shouted again. However, she suddenly realized something and her expression changed. As though he did not hear anything, Su Zimo continued walking forward. Under Little Fatty's stunned gaze, he patted the latter on the shoulder and smiled faintly, passing through the crowd and walking out. Looking at Su Zimo's back view, Jun Hao of Azure Frost Sect shuddered and vaguely thought of a possibility. Even though that possibility seemed ridiculous and crazy. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo was exposed before the 100,000-odd Foundation establishment cultivators. Under countless burning gazes, Su Zimo did not look uneasy at all. Instead, he was calm and composed as he walked forward slowly with his hands behind his back. He crossed the sunken area and headed towards the spectator area. Who is that? What is he doing? He's only in his 20s. There's no way he's Mr. Mo, that's right. How can a Foundation establishment cultivator be Mr. Mo? Many cultivators in the crowd sneered. After sneering, everyone looked at Su Zimo who was gradually walking away. However, the crowd suddenly went silent. A weak voice sounded, "None of us have seen Mr. Mo before. Why can't he be a Foundation establishment cultivator in his 20s? Nobody replied. Everyone was waiting for an answer. The three great protectors lowered their eyes, not saying a word. That person's body swayed and his eyes were blurry as he shouted, "This is the spectator area of perfected Jin Dan. What is this person trying to do here? Huh? You guards of the capital and the Imperial Army, chase him away." The three guards did not move at all, as though they did not hear anything. The discussions at the spectator area gradually quietened down. Some cultivators with sharp minds gradually snapped back to their senses. The green-robed cultivator had already arrived. Not only did the three guards not have any intention of stopping him, even the emperor had acquiesced to it. What did that mean? Pust. Many cultivators secretly gasped as their expressions changed slightly. Could it be that young Foundation establishment cultivator? Could not be. The drunken perfected Jin Dan cultivator sobered up slightly as well. Shaking his head, he tried his best to open his eyes and look at the newcomer. At that moment, more than 100,000 Foundation establishment cultivators and more than 1,000 perfected Jin Dan cultivators were focused on the green-robed cultivator who was about to step onto the golden carpet. Everyone was watching. When Su Zimo arrived at the spectator area, the three guards on both sides bowed and cupped their fists at the same time. "Mr. Mo, please take a seat." Su Zimo nodded with a calm expression and stepped onto the golden carpet, ascending it. Boom! The moment those words were said, it was as though a gigantic rock had been tossed into a calm lake, causing a huge wave to surge in everyone's hearts. The huge square was completely silent at this moment. It was as if an invisible force was choking everyone's throat, making it impossible for them to breathe. It was the same at the spectator area. Time seemed to have stopped on and off the stage. Everyone was petrified on the spot, motionless. The green-robed cultivator on the golden carpet was the only one who was still walking over step by step. Clang! The wine glass in the drunken perfected Jin Dan cultivator's hand fell to the ground with a loud sound. That sound seemed to have broken the frozen time. The man broke out in a cold sweat and instantly sobered up. Recalling what he had just said, his whole body quivered and he hurriedly bowed with cupped fists. With a terrified expression, he said, Greetings, Mr. Mo." The cultivators at the bottom of the spectator area were all itinerant cultivators. After all, these itinerant cultivators had not experienced much. Coupled with the fact that Mo Ling's name was way too prominent and frightening, some of them stood up instinctively. "Mr. Mo. Mr. Mo." As Su Zimo advanced, rows of perfected Jin Dan cultivators on both sides of the spectator area stood up and greeted him with cupped fists. It was a spectacular sight. Stars surrounding the moon, accumulating the momentum. At that moment, everyone neglected the age and cultivation of the person before them. Chapter 311. Under countless gazes and the greetings of the many perfected Jin Dan beings, Su Zimo arrived before Xian Yi and Lu Hui. Bowing deeply, he said in a deep voice, "Greetings, Peak Masters, I'm Su Zimo of Misty Peak." Good child. Hurry and get up." Xian Yi hurried forward to support Su Zimo's arms with an emotional expression. "So, Mr. Mo's real name is Su Zimo. Mr. Mo is at Foundation establishment at such a young age? Didn't they say that Misty Peak is bad at weapon refinement? How did such a monster incarnate appear out of nowhere? Our ancestral graves are fuming." Many perfected Jin Dan beings muttered softly as they looked at Su Zimo with curious gazes. Lu Hui turned around and wiped her tears. She smiled and said, "Xian Yi, don't hold him anymore. Let him sit down." Right. Enlightened, Xian Yi said, "Hurry and go over. We'll talk about your matters when we get back. There's plenty of time." "Yes." Su Zimo nodded and turned to continue walking forward. His gaze shifted and landed on perfected being Tsang Lang, who was not far away. Their gazes met. Su Zimo smiled. Perfected being Sung Lang's eyes widened as he looked at Su Zimo, who was approaching. His face was ashen and he could not bring himself to smile. How could this be? 3 years ago, when he heard that Su Zimo had become a cultivator as well, perfected being Sung Lang merely smiled indifferently. Even if Su Zimo were to enter the cultivation world, he would never be able to catch up to him. In his eyes, Su Zimo was still that ant that he could trample on, and crush as he pleased. However, that ant in the past had grown a little bigger. Perfected being Sung Lang had cultivated for more than 200 years. What was his current status, strength and status? Just the connections he had accumulated over the past 200 years were enough to crush Su Zimo. But now, the moment Su Zimo stepped onto the golden carpet, perfected being Sung Lang suddenly realized that apart from his own strength, all his advantages were gone. In terms of status, influence, and connections, he was no match for Su Zimo. Or rather, he couldn't compare to Mr. Mo. A month ago, at the entrance of Mo's spirit weapon workshop, Su Zimo had promised that his head could be exchanged for a supreme-grade spirit weapon. Perfected being Sung Lang could clearly sense that many perfected Jin Dan were tempted back then and even revealed a hint of killing intent. If not for the fact that he was in the capital where no one dared to act rashly, it was very likely that he would be besieged. Fate was such a wonderful thing. In the past, perfected being Sung Lang could kill Su Zimo with ease with a snap of his fingers. Right now, a single promise from Su Zimo was almost exchanged for perfected being Sung Lang's head. Su Zimo passed by perfected being Sung Lang and paused for a moment before sighing gently. Sung Lang, do you still remember what I said back then? Without waiting for perfected being Sung Lang's reply, Su Zimo had already walked over. Even though it had been many years, for some reason, perfected being Sung Lang could still remember that scene clearly. The young man was expressionless and said in an extremely calm tone, "If you don't kill me, you'll definitely regret it in the future." Suddenly, perfected being Sung Lang regretted it. In the square, the 100,000-odd Foundation establishment cultivators were completely dumbfounded. Apart from those from Misty Peak who were jumping for joy, the other cultivators had conflicted expressions. Just now, all of them were treating Su Zimo as a joke. It was only at this moment that they realized that the true joke was themselves. Jun Hao of Azure Frost Sect heaved a long sigh of relief. Even though he had expected it, he was still rather shocked when he found out about the outcome. Tao Feng of True Fire Sect had an uncertain expression. Each time he recalled what he had said just now, his face would turn paler. The moment Su Zimo sat down, a fragrance wafted over. Immediately after, another person appeared on the other side of Su Zimo. Su Zimo glanced sideways and was slightly stunned. It was Demonis Ji who had moved the seat to his left and was right beside him. With that, Su Zimo's seat was sandwiched between the two princesses. Su Zimo coughed gently and felt a little uncomfortable. Hee, I'll sit here, Demonis Ji chuckled. Ji Yaoshua looked at her younger sister dotingly and shook her head with a chuckle. The princes seemed to understand Demonis Ji's temper as well and smiled without saying anything. Instead, they nodded towards Su Zimo. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. Others might not have been able to tell, but he could vaguely sense that Demonis Ji's laughter was a little strange. I wonder what this Demonis is thinking about. Su Zimo frowned and looked straight ahead. Right then, the Emperor's voice sounded and reverberated in all directions. The sect competition has officially begun. Chapter 312. The rules of the sect competition are the same as the previous years. There are 4 rankings: Spirit, Talisman, Elixir and Weapon. The top 10 of each ranking will be chosen as the experts of this year's 4 rankings. The 10 people on the spirit ranking can choose a spirit art of their choice. The 10 people on the talisman ranking can choose a talisman art. The 10 people on the elixir ranking can choose an elixir formula. The 10 people on the weapon ranking can choose a superior grade spirit weapon of their choice. Of course, apart from that, there are also large amounts of spirit stones as rewards. The Great Zhou dynasty had been established for more than 10,000 years and had accumulated many years of foundation. There were bound to be many secret skills and elixir formulas in their treasure vaults that might even be extinct. It was enough to tempt every cultivator. Most foundation establishment cultivators used middle-grade spirit weapons. For foundation establishment cultivators, superior-grade spirit weapons were fatally attractive as well. Of course, the most important thing was that the people on the 4 rankings could enter the ancient battlefield to train for a year. With just a few simple words from the emperor, the 100,000-odd foundation establishment cultivators in the square felt their blood boil and were raring to go. The emperor declared, "Since Mr. Mo has been invited to be the judge for this sect competition, let's begin with the weapon ranking. Since Mr. Mo belongs to Misty Peak and has to enter the ancient battlefield as well, it means that everyone will have to fight for the remaining 9 spots on the weapon ranking." The emperor's meaning was clear. Given Su Zimo's capabilities, he would be able to secure the number 1 spot on the weapon ranking even without a competition. No one had any objections to this. Even weapon refinement masters who had been immersed in the art of weapon refinement for hundreds of years did not dare to compete with Su Zimo, let alone the young weapon refinement masters in the square. "Mr. Mo, do you have anything else to say?" the emperor asked. Rising, Su Zimo gazed at the 100,000-odd foundation establishment cultivators in the square with a deep gaze and said slowly, "When I arrived, I heard someone say that Misty Peak has no one who can refine weapons." At that point, the square and spectator area were in an uproar. If this was before, it was nothing much to say as it was something that everyone acknowledged. But now, they would definitely be hitting a metal plate if they said something like that. Everyone swept their gazes and saw a hint of killing intent in Su Zimo's eyes. They realized that the number 1 weapon refinement master of Great Zhou was about to make an example out of someone. "Who said that? Come out." Su Zimo was almost standing at the top of the spectator stand, looking down at the square from above. Although his tone was calm, it revealed a domineering aura that was above all. Swish! Swish! Countless gazes fell on Tao Feng. Before this, everyone had seen the dispute between Tao Feng and Su Zimo. Tao Feng felt the pressure on his body multiply. His face was pale and terrified. "Who is Mr. Mo talking about? He's from the True Fire sect. I heard that he's the number 1 weapon refiner of the younger generation. What a joke. Mr. Mo is only in his 20s, and he has the nerve to call himself the number 1 weapon refiner of the younger generation?" The discussion in the crowd grew louder and louder. The crowd around True Fire sect gradually dispersed. Seeing that he was about to be isolated, Tao Feng gritted his teeth and stood out with a venomous look in his eyes. Tao Feng said hatefully, "It was me." The perfected Jean Dan from True Fire sect frowned with terrible expressions. "Very good." Su Zimo nodded. In the blink of an eye, Tao Feng took the initiative and could not help but laugh into the skies. "Su Zimo, if you have the guts, come down and compete with me. Everyone will be able to judge who's the joke. I believe that everyone wants to witness that so-called Mo clan's spirit gathering technique of yours as well." The emperor was expressionless and thought to himself, impressive. With those words, True Fire sect was in an undefeatable position. If Su Zimo lived up to his reputation, he would naturally be exposed in the next round and Tao Feng would become famous because of that. Even if Su Zimo was truly Mo Ling, there was a chance that he would make mistakes in the next round under such immense pressure in front of everyone. Furthermore, there was no loss to True Fire sect at all and they could even watch Su Zimo's weapon refinement process. They might even be able to catch a glimpse of the secrets within. "You want to learn my spirit gathering technique?" Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat and he could tell what Tao Feng's intentions were. However, he was not afraid of anyone watching or learning his spirit-gathering technique. That was because no one else would be able to learn it. All the weapon refinement masters of Misty Peak had gone through such a painful experience, anyone who learned his spirit-gathering technique would be unlucky. Su Zimo, do you dare to compete? Say it. Tao Feng shouted with a provocative gaze. I won't compete with you because you're not qualified. However, Su Zimo changed the topic and said indifferently, in a while, I'll teach you how to refine spirit weapons on the spot. Learn well and don't embarrass True Fire Sect. I'll teach you. It was completely the tone and attitude of an elder guiding a junior. Everyone was dumbfounded. Chapter 313. I'll teach you weapon refinement. Against Tao Feng's challenge, a single sentence from Su Zimo widened the gap between the two of them instantly. Hee hee. Tao Feng sneered, let's see how Mr. Mo teaches me. The Emperor waved his hand. The weapon ranking competition has officially begun. As soon as the Emperor said that, the cultivators participating in the weapon ranking competition broke away from the crowd and arrived at the sunken area in the middle of the 4 jade pillars. Tao Feng walked over and looked at Su Zimo provocatively the entire time. Go for it, Senior Brother Shui. Junior Brother Shui, go on. With Junior Brother Su around, go all out without any pressure. Under the encouragement of Little Fatty, Leng Ro, and the others, Shui Yi arrived at the sunken area as well. He was filled with confidence and was in a perfect state. Shui Yi knew that he might even be able to perform exceptionally in such a state. Su Zimo sat high above without moving and watched everything quietly without any intention of getting up. No matter what, he was the judge appointed by the Emperor and his position was unshakable. There were no restrictions on what spirit weapons each person could refine in the weapon ranking competition. However, there were only 3 rounds. Within the 3 rounds, they would choose the spirit weapon of the highest grade and quality to participate in the final evaluation. If they failed all 3 rounds, it would mean that they would be disqualified. There were a total of 1,072 weapon refinement masters vying for a spot in Weapon Peak for this sect competition and they were all in their positions in the sunken area. Almost at the same time, the 1,000-odd weapon refinement masters took out their weapon tripods and placed them in front of them. Swoosh! Instantly, countless flames rose and intertwined. Some of them were level 1 spirit fires while some had already cultivated level 3 spirit fires. Cauldron warming. Those who could participate in the sect competition were all elites of their respective sects and were naturally extremely familiar with the process of weapon refinement. Many cultivators had already chosen their materials. After warming, they placed the materials into the weapon tripods and increased the temperature of the flames to begin smelting. At this step, the higher the grade of the flame, the more impurities it could refine. Shui Yi had already cultivated a level 2 spirit fire while Tao Feng's flame was the highest grade, level 3 spirit fire. Time passed slowly. The first to complete the smelting was Tao Feng. The next step was to sculpt. The next step was tempering. Many cultivators in the spectator area and square were already attracted by Tao Feng's weapon refinement and nodded their heads secretly. It had to be said that Tao Feng's refining skills were indeed far superior to others. At the age of 30, to have such understanding and attainments in refining was truly rare. But then, another name flashed through everyone's mind. They couldn't help but look sideways at Su Zimo, who was sitting at the top. At this time, Su Zimo's expression was calm. Tao Feng's brilliant refining technique seemed to have no effect on him at all. Hey! Just as everyone was attracted by the thousands of weapon refinement masters in the square, Demoness Ji sneaked to Su Zimo's side and blew into his ear, calling out seductively. Su Zimo was expressionless and motionless. When Demoness Ji caught sight of Su Zimo's slightly stiff body and flushed face, she could not help but purse her lips and chuckle coquettishly. Second young Master Su, you're so biased. Su Zimo's mouth twitched and he looked around with an unnatural expression. He heaved a sigh of relief when he realized that no one was paying attention to them. Demoness Ji stuck close to Su Zimo and whispered, I heard that you were the one who custom-made my sister's robe. Yes, Su Zimo was helpless and could only tell the truth. Many perfected beings Jean Dan sensed something and turned to look. True Fire Sect Sima Ji said in an eccentric manner, Oh, Mr. Mo, are you prepared to make a move? Mr. Mo, as the #1 weapon refinement master of Great Zhou, you can't possibly be trying to fool us with a superior grade spirit weapon, right? Elder Zhang sneered. Both of them had lived for hundreds of years and their eyelashes were hollow. Naturally, they knew that a person's mental state and state would have a huge impact on weapon refinement. That was the reason why both of them were constantly provoking him with their words. Right then, Tao Feng raised his voice. The great Mr. Mo probably doesn't need to refine 3 rounds. I heard that the success rate of the Mo clan's spirit gathering technique is extremely high. Given Mr. Mo's capabilities, a single round is enough. Pressure. Continuous pressure. As long as Su Zimo's emotions were fluctuating, there would definitely be problems during the weapon refinement process. However, in the eyes of Su Zimo, the people of True Fire Sect were like clowns. His spirit-gathering technique had nothing to do with one's state. After 3 years of accumulation, Su Zimo's momentum was already set. The doubts and mockery of the outside world could not shake his mind at all. You're right, a single round is enough. Su Zimo smiled indifferently. Tao Feng, everyone from True Fire Sect, take a good look at what weapon refinement is. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.